Good evening. I'd like to call tonight's meeting to order. We'll start off with our Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Galvin. Thank you. We'll start off with presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the commission. Don't have any requests to speak so far. We'll move on to correspondence and staff communications from our planning secretary.
Yes, thank you, Chair Perez. 2 items to note for you. First of all, each commissioner should have 3 separate memos from staff tonight. One for myself regarding the Buckeye matter, which is agenda item number 2. Another one from Sandra White regarding agenda item number 3, which is the Promenade project. And then also one from Kathy Allen regarding the River Grande Estates project, which is item number 6. If you don't have any copies, we can have our clerk get you a copy. And second of all, at last night's city council meeting, the council heard the 2 respective appeals on the 2 cell tower matters that were before our commission several times this year. And the short version of it is that the council sustained the planning commission's decision on both projects. So those now will move on to the next phase. So that concludes staff correspondence at this time.
Thank you. Moving on to disclosure of ex parte communications. I'll start on my left. Commissioner Galvin?
None to report.
None.
None myself. Thank you. We'll move on to consideration and approval of the minutes from our October 2nd meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, motion passes. We'll move on to our regular agenda, and before we get to item number 2, I'd just like to remind everyone that the request to speak cards are over on the side here, and they should be completed and returned to the clerk prior to completion of any staff presentation. For those speakers wishing to speak on items not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the commission, please write the item number on the card. All speakers will be limited to 3 minutes tonight. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and televised, so all speakers, in order to be recognized, must be called on by the chair, me, and come forward to the microphone. Speaking in public may cause some individuals to be uncomfortable, so everyone is asked to be professional and respectful at all times. Thank you. Moving on to item number 2, public hearing regarding Buckeye Terminals CUP, time extension request.
Yes, thank you again. I'm going to do a 2-part presentation on this item. I'm going to do the first part, which would be an overview of the project that's before you, and then I'm going to invite our Fire Chief Martinez to also provide some input on this project to the commission tonight before we proceed to the public hearing, if the commission would so permit. So before you tonight is the time extension request from Buckeye Terminals on their existing use permit, which allows them to bring in ethanol via rail to their facility on South River Road. This matter has been before the Planning Commission several times over the last several years regarding potential time extensions, which the most recent one was just about 2 years ago now, when the Commission granted the last time extension. This was originally approved back in 2002 and allows Buckeye to bring in by rail ethanol up to 6 cars per day of ethanol to its facility that's at 1700 South River Road. After the initial time period, the Commission wanted to see this project on an annual basis, and it has granted some time extensions in the past, the most recent one being 2 years ago. This matter is due, the use permit presently is due to expire on December 31st, 2014, this year. So we are bringing this forward tonight. Buckeye has requested a 5-year time extension. However, staff is recommending that the commission not grant any time extension at all, and thus vote to terminate the use permit as of December 31st, 2014. I'm sure as the commission is aware, as we have covered this particular project on several times in the last several years, we have identified several concerns and issues regarding it that we believe is grounds for not granting any additional time extensions. We continue to experience significant rail conflicts at the 15th Street rail crossing, and I would like to call your attention to one of the, and I want to elaborate on a little bit for you, is one of the attachments in your staff report, which actually is attachment 6. It's a large chart and entries. Pardon me, that's not the one I wanted to. Excuse me, it's attachment 7. This is a important part of this. This is something that we've had news since we last considered this matter, and what this table is, and this is an excerpt from a 135-page document that I have from our traffic division. It identifies when the signal at 15th Street is preempted by rail traffic, and then it also identifies when that preemption ends. And so I provide an excerpt just to be able to show the commission. I didn't want to give you the whole 135 pages of similar material, but what this indicates is that there is significant preemptions on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, at the 15th Street crossing. Now certainly not all these are attributed to Buckeye, but what's important to note here and look at is some of the timing on some of these crossings, as they often happen in fairly frequent succession. And indicating that there's a lot of cars that are moving back and forth across the intersection rather than just moving just straight through and on to other destinations. A lot has changed since the project was originally approved back in 2002. The area certainly is transitioning, by evidence of next month the Mike McGowan Bridge opening and other improvements such as CEMEX starting to be demoed, new signals in the area, et cetera. And this is also a matter of Pioneer Bluff transition that's on the council's strategic plan for this year. There are various safety concerns that we have, and Fire Chief Martinez is going to elaborate on those for you tonight. But at this time, staff is recommending that you not grant any time extension and thus allow the use permit to terminate as of December 31st. So unless there are any other questions for me, I'd like to invite Chief Martinez up to also address the commission on this matter.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much. My name is Rick Martinez. I am your fire chief. Madam Chair, members of the commission, I'm going to be brief. I'm not going to repeat Mr. Tilley's comments, but I do want to highlight a few things. First and foremost, my comments are directed specifically at managing risk. I've only been in this city for 11 months, but I have served both in the fire service and emergency management for the last 40 years in the Sacramento area. When I first arrived here, one of the things that got my attention very quickly was the impacts that rail plays on our community, and more specifically, the rail cars that line Jefferson that have been there since I've been here, and they predate me. My comments are not an objection or an indictment of the rail industry. Rail has contributed greatly to our community and to our state and its development, but it is, and you may know that I have been involved to a fair amount of recent on the oil by rail issue, dealing specifically with Bakken oil. These aren't those concerns. These are really specific on moving this product into our community. Currently, as has already been reported, we have rail cars moving ethanol to the Buckeye facility daily. Preemption was discussed with respect to the interruption at the 15th Street crossing. As Mr. Tilley said, with the opening of the Mike McGowan Bridge, that's going to provide us, the fire department, with better access into Southport. However, I can tell you, I'm not an expert at transportation or in rail, but I've sat at that intersection in my short time here on multiple occasions and watched rail cars being shifted back and forth at different times of the day. But the most significant aspect of this, of staff's recommendation, of which I wholeheartedly support, is the fact that currently, we as local government have no jurisdiction over moving this product because simply of the vehicle of which it moves in. If the product is moved on a tanker truck, then we do have ways to mitigate it. We control speed, we control routing, we can inspect the vehicles, the police department and the highway patrol. There are a number of things we most specifically can control whether or not it stays overnight in our communities. And we have rail cars that stay overnight for more than just one night in our communities. They're close to parks, they're close to high-density housing, and they are along one of our main arterials. Those tank cars are unoccupied, unaccompanied, they're unattended. And while I would submit to you that, yes, by moving them by tanker truck, that is going to increase the number of tanker trucks that currently are carrying this combustible flammable product, but it's a modest increase. I suspect it's, when you compare it to the total volume that we have on the road today, it's 1 or 2%. But what it does is it gets us out of the business of having unattended rail cars with ethanol, a combustible flammable product, sitting on one of our main arterials, sitting in parts of our community. I went through the staff report today, and I noted that the comments from UP on that, the fact that if they eliminate the use of these rail tankers at this facility, that may not have any impact on that crossing. All I know is what I've been through personally, and that is, I can tell you, I don't think there'll be jockeying tank cars there. So I stand before you in supporting staff's recommendation. I can tell you that I'm much more comfortable managing the risk on tanker trucks. There are much more tools available to us in dealing with that. We deal with it today. We don't. We can't. We have no authority to deal with it on the rail whatsoever. And that is a problem that's manyfold. With respect to other products that may be on our rail today that I may have similar feelings with, we'll attempt to deal with those, but the question at hand today is whether this conditional use permit should be extended. And I'm here as your fire chief to say that I support the denial of that extension, because I think in the long run, that gives the fire department an additional tool to protect the residents and the community at large. With that, I'd be happy to try to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Chief. Do my commissioners have any questions? Okay, Commissioner Galvin?
Presentation. You mentioned unoccupied unattended cars. Do you know if there's a security out at the yard where those extra cars are kept?
I don't know. But what I can tell you, because I'm around the city at different times of the day and night, I know I've never seen anyone at the Westgate Yard, and I just came through there again this evening, and I've never seen any type of security on Jefferson Boulevard specifically for those cars. A concern of mine is that they could be tampered with, and that's a problem.
So I too have not seen anybody out there, and I share that same concern. Thank you.
Anything else?
Sure, Commissioner Moore?
Do we know, the tanks are empty, the ones we're most concerned about, the ones that are parked next to residential, correct?
I'm concerned with both for different reasons.
Yeah, well, I.
But
I mean-
while the tanks are empty, they're, as I best of my knowledge, they're not purged of fumes. So
That was my question. Do you know if the fumes are recirculated back into the tank?
I do not know that.
I mean, in a truck it is.
I do not know that.
I'm an expert in this, because that was my second.
And I'm not
I
an
used to have
expert
a
at too
tank
much, sir, but I can tell you.
operation. But in a tanker truck, we take the fumes out and we haul them back to the refinery, and when we load again, those fumes go back out.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know if that's happening with the tankers. Maybe when Buckeye comes up, they could tell us that. I just don't know if they're recirculating, because the tanker is actually more volatile with the fumes in it than it is loaded with the product. The product you can control, but the fumes you can't. And that's why I know a tanker truck is more volatile empty than it is loaded.
That's true, and the only addition I would add to that is that when you have a loaded anything that has product in it, once it starts leaking, whether it's intentional, accidental, or just through some other failure, then we have an issue with product on the ground, which is a problem for us, both environmentally and from a fire perspective. So they offer a unique set of challenges.
Commissioner Guerrero?
Yes, and thank you very much for presenting tonight. I really appreciate you being here today, giving us more information. There is a memo that we received just today. I don't know if you had a chance to review it, but on the first paragraph of the letter to the Planning Commission, it does say that if the CUP extension is denied, Buckeye will receive ethanol via thousands of tanker truck trips. Can you give me the pros and cons of that?
Well, there's a couple, but primarily from my perspective is that we control roadway speed through both posted and through enforcement. So we can control how it comes to our community, when it comes to our community. With respect to the volume, there are literally thousands of trips of tankers with combustible flammable material in our community, throughout our community. But we also control the roads that they travel on. We also, more importantly, control where they sit, which is a huge issue for me, the storage. The actual volume that has increased is difficult for us to know exactly because that information is not made available to us. We can speculate and use some material that's available to us, but we don't know. But I will tell you, I believe the risk, and I would subscribe to you that, yes, rail has a great safety record, but still, and I've been involved in this debate a lot in the last several months, we have no influence of rail, none. We're preempted from that. And so we can't, so the fact that it sits there, the fact that it comes in the way it comes in, we don't have the opportunity to weigh in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much for
Appreciate
the
it.
opportunity.
I'll go ahead and open the public hearing and ask if the applicant would like to come up and speak.
Hi, good evening. My name is Braden Chadwick. I'm an attorney. I represent Buckeye Terminals LLC, and I also have a short PowerPoint also, if we could put that up. I'll see if I can figure out how to control it. Thanks, otherwise I'd be hopelessly lost. It's been an interesting ride, actually, the last few weeks. And I want to just go over, from the applicant's point of view, that before we kind of get into specifics, I'd like to point out a couple things that are in the staff report that we noticed as the applicant. First of all, there we go. Yeah, back one. There you go. Thank you. See, even with the instruction, I still can't get it right. All right. There's some, we noticed there's some issues with the staff report. First of all, the staff report doesn't contain a heck of a lot of analysis. There are a lot of conclusory statements in there. But one thing that we noticed, and we noticed this from the very beginning when we had our pre-application meeting with staff, is that it's outcome-driven. There was a decision made by planning staff not to renew this permit. And that was made months and months and months ago, prior to any objective analysis. That's been fairly clear. And that what they did is they started from the decision of not to renew the permit, and they worked backward from there and just rationalized, I think, that prior decision. And that's what you have before you. So as I go through my presentation, I'd like just to note certain things that I'm gonna try and point out for you that we'll point out here that are problems with the staff report. The first is that despite having the application for months and months, staff never did any sort of CEQA analysis, never even tried, didn't look objectively at the permit process or what the impacts of the project might be. In fact, their staff report tells you that exact same thing, is they never even tried to do any sort of CEQA analysis as to whether they were going to approve this or recommend approval of the project or not. That tells you where their mindset is. They weren't ever going to recommend approval, no matter where the facts led them. The second thing is that there are some fairly significant and severe environmental implications of denying the permit. Keep in mind, back in 2002, one of the main reasons for having this permit to begin with was the state of California demanded that ethanol be added as an additive to gasoline. And the city was extremely concerned with the number of truck trips that were a potential on South River Road. And as one of the commissioners pointed out, this amounts to thousands and thousands of tanker truck trips going back and forth on that roadway. And that's what happens if you would deny this conditional use permit, is you would take those thousands and thousands of tanker trucks, you put them on the road. There are also environmental implications that go along with this too, of denying the permit. For example, with all these thousands of truck trips, there are PM10 and PM2.5, diesel exhaust, things of that nature that you're introducing to the neighborhood. This is not insignificant, and this goes, I think, hand in hand with the traffic implications that the fire chief candidly admitted to there being. That this is actually a fairly severe traffic impact that you'll be kind of releasing onto that area. Some of the assumptions of the staff report are based on speculation or sometimes outright wrong data. For example, there is an underestimation of truck trips. The city has made several inquiries into the Air District trying to figure out how many truck trips they're going to be, what the throughput is currently and historically. The Air District's made us made aware of this and told us, but essentially it's market-driven. And so the numbers that you see in the staff report is a guess on their point of view. It's not the 2,200 truck trips that they're talking about. It's more akin to 4,000 to as much as 5,200, which you will note back in 2002 was the number that ARCO put up as one of their maximums, was 5,200 truck trips. That's a lot. The other thing too, I think, is that there was no commission statement last time regarding, additional extensions. There was one particular planning commissioner who said that based on circumstances, they might not be supportive of additional time extensions, but that was the offhand remark of one planning commissioner, not the judgment of the planning commission as a whole. There's also some problems with the rail crossing at 15th Street. Again, they use wrong data. Mr. Tilley directed your attention to attachment 7 of the staff report, where he says, look at all the times that that is tripped at 15th Street when trucks are going back and forth or just passing through. Again, one thing he didn't tell you and one thing he cannot tell you are which of those are triggered by Buckeye's meager contribution to those, if at all. One thing that you do have, which the city obviously does not have, is Union Pacific. Union Pacific was very specific and said, if you deny this permit, it's going to have almost zero impact on 15th Street. And that's something that actually they do know about. So staff, makes this thing and says, look, you deny the permit, you fix 15th Street. And Union Pacific said, absolutely, you don't. You get no benefit from that. So I think, again, staff report left that out. But again, Union Pacific sent you a letter saying exactly that there's no benefit to doing this. The other things I think that I want you to just take a look at, if you would, as I go through this, is that there are some erroneous safety assumptions regarding truck traffic. And there are potential devastating implications for traffic and safety for the public that I think the commission should take into consideration. So we'll go through these things really quickly. But that's just a couple things I'd like to point out as you deliberate on this decision tonight. Since 1950, the terminal has been a source of employment here in West Sacramento. So that's over 60 years that it's been there. There's nothing new there. Essentially, it's been operating. And so the question is not, this is not a new use, this is just existing how things always have been. So why deliver by rail? Why is it important? It doesn't really change Buckeye's operations at all. It's not going to force them to move, it's not going to force them to change their operations other than having ethanol delivered by rail. But I think it's interesting and it's worth noting that there are several reasons why rail is preferable both for Buckeye as well as the city. First of all is air quality and the environment. Ethanol is obviously an additive that's required under California law since 2002, but there is also a dramatic reduction in PM2.5 and PM10, dramatic reductions in truck traffic on South River Road, and of course on those same crossings that they're complaining about right now, truck traffic makes everything worse in every aspect. Speaking of traffic, again, rail delivery removes between 3,900 and 5,200 trucks and truck trips from the road. That's not insignificant. That is a lot of trucks. And again, the city's primary concern and why the city wanted this in 2002 was to avoid putting all these trucks on the road. Now, here's something that's missing from the staff report. This reduction of truck trips is so important, especially when you factor in the McGowan Bridge opening. Now, this was mentioned in the staff report as something that's a good thing, and it probably is for the city. The problem is, and I'll show you a schematic a little bit later, but the problem is that the opening of the McGowan Bridge will dump thousands and thousands of residential car trips onto this same road. Staff has never analyzed that. yet they want you to dump thousands and thousands of tanker trucks onto this road at the exact same time. That's a problem and needs to be considered. There are severe safety implications there. And actually, we've had discussions with the fire department not too long ago, probably 2 months ago, on this same issue. Because the fire department was concerned about what the traffic implications are when opening the McGowan Bridge. And if we have tanker trucks there, that's a problem. So the fire department's well aware of that as well. The other thing that's been missing from the staff report is any mention that South River Road is going to be undergoing construction. And right now, they're analyzing a traffic impact study on South River Road as to how they're going to modify it. So what you have is this confluence of events that the staff has left out of the report that I think is very important that the commission consider. The first is adding the thousands and thousands of tanker trucks onto the road. The second is adding thousands and thousands of residential traffic onto the road. And the third is there's a traffic impact study currently in progress, and they don't know what it's going to say. And they're going to do construction on South River Road and modify it. And they're asking you to take a chance and just say, dump all these trucks on there, and we don't even know what's going to happen. Again, these are questions I think that the commission should ask staff about, because they're very concerning to me and to Buckeye. So public safety is something that's a problem here too. Marty Tuttle, in his memo to you and the staff report, basically said, public safety is my #1 concern. If that's true, why is staff recommending this if they don't know what the outcome is going to be? On residential traffic, on the opening of the bridge, on the truck trips, on the construction, and the traffic impact study that they haven't finished yet for this very site. Now, I think that the last thing I'll mention on this is that there's no local control. The fire chief talked about, well, we have more control over these trucks, and he mentioned speed limits. He mentioned that there might be some way to pull them over and inspect them or something. That's not going to happen. B, the fire department doesn't pull over trucks and stop them. That's the police department that does that. And if the fire department's suggesting that, despite, again, what the fire chief said is that rail has an excellent record of safety for hauling ethanol, which they do, and that the fire chief's memo to you says, and the quote is right there, it says that risks inherent to transportation will be deferred to roadways. He admits that what you're doing is, by denying the CUP, transferring all of that public safety risk onto the roadway instead of leaving it on the tracks. He says, well, we can mitigate that because we can control the speed limit. I submit to you that doesn't make a lot of sense when you factor in everything else that's going on around here and staff that doesn't really know what's going to happen when you factor all these things in. And I guess the final thing is there's no hurry for this. You know, the Planning Commission, you have within your power to grant additional year or 2 years, or as the requested 5 years, to see what happens. There's no hurry here, and there's no real benefit either, according to Union Pacific on 15th Street, which is supposedly what you would get if you denied the CUP. So let's talk about rail impacts of the 15th Street crossing, since that's where we're at. First of all, are there closures at the 15th Street crossing? According to Attachment 7, absolutely, and we don't dispute that at all. What we do dispute, and again, what staff cannot tell you, is which of those are Buckeyes. And Buckeyes, according to UP, of course, Buckeyes is just such a tiny fraction, it won't make any difference at all. So Buckeye is not the cause of any traffic complaints there. And by the way, there haven't been any complaints. Of course, there are closures there, which we don't dispute. The last thing, too, I would say is that if you look here on the map, you can see the residential area right there to the south, and that's where all the residential traffic is going to be coming from. You see the location of McGowan Bridge connecting to South River Road. You see Jefferson Boulevard there, which is where a lot of that traffic currently goes. And then you see the Buckeye facility. And if you just follow the roadway where it dumps all of that residential traffic, it's right in front of the Buckeye facility. So again, the question you have to ask yourself is, are the public safety implications of this, which again, the fire department is concerned about because they scheduled a meeting with Buckeye to discuss this issue without, of course, the CUP issue added in there, because they're concerned just about the trucks going in there and hauling off gasoline. Imagine thousands and thousands of tanker truck trips additional on there. So the fire department is actually worried about this. So as far as rail impacts go, staff has actually identified in some of the meetings, and staff's been, at least on some of them, been confused as to which trucks are which. This is liquefied petroleum rail cars. They look suspiciously similar to ethanol rail cars. Now, I'll give you 3 guesses as to which one of these is more dangerous in terms of sitting on the track. Ethanol rail cars do not explode, okay? Ethanol rail cars may burn, but they don't explode. Liquefied petroleum gas cars do explode, and those are not what goes to Buckeye. Ethanol is extremely safe, especially when transported by rail. And to kind of raise a boogeyman and saying that there's some sort of traffic impact or some sort of imagined terrorist activity or something out there, it's just not true. It's not true at all. Buckeye has its own spur where the deliveries sit and where they're offloaded. So let's talk about that 15th Street crossing just real briefly again. What's the likely impact of that if Buckeye's extension request is denied? No improvement at all. And supposedly that's the thing that the staff is pointing out that you get is this improvement at 15th Street. And again, there are people who know most about that is Union Pacific. And their letter to you unequivocally states that there is no impact if you were to deny this permit. Let's talk about the improvements to South River Road. So what's the likely traffic impact if the CUP is denied? Traffic impacts will be exacerbated. You heard it from staff and you heard it from the police or from the fire chief. There's no doubt that that's what's going to happen. Ethanol trucks will mix now with passenger trucks during peak commute hours. In addition to construction activities that are going to happen there that the city's planning that, again, they didn't tell you about in your staff report. And the question is that a good thing? Thousands of commuter cars, thousands of tanker trucks mixing together. And I submit to you that's not something that the city wants, and it's certainly not something Buckeye wants, because Buckeye has to deal with this as well as the tanker trucks turn in to this facility. Rail versus trucks on the safety issue. The staff report says that denial of the permit is necessary because the hazard presented by the ethanol rail cars on the tracks. Now, LPG rail cars, as I mentioned before, which are not what Buckeye has, will continue to be stored along the tracks at Union Pacific. So the danger of an exploding tanker truck doesn't come from ethanol, it comes from LPG. Those are still there, and Buckeye has nothing to do with them. Rail is a safer form of transportation as compared to trucks on public roads. Your fire chief even said it here tonight, that it is safer. His issue is he thinks he has more control, but he doesn't have any additional control. He doesn't control the routing. That's controlled by the roadways. That's controlled by the drivers. The city might have some control over speed limits, which is absolutely true, but I'm not sure that controlling the speed of a truck is the same thing as making sure that it's safe, especially when you're talking about traffic movements and the city doesn't know what those are going to be. So the denial of permit will actually increase the risk of ethanol-related accidents. Behind all of this, if we get down to brass tacks, this isn't really about rail delivery, and it's not really about traffic impacts. When you get down to brass tacks, what planning staff's concerned about, and they told us this, is transitioning the Pioneer Bluff District. They want Buckeye to move, and they're using this as a pressure point. Now, Buckeye, it's more convenient for Buckeye to move ethanol by rail. I won't deny that. However, this doesn't get Buckeye to move any quicker. They are a vested use. They don't need a permit from the city or anyone else to stay there or continue their operations. I think what's interesting here is Buckeye has worked with the city in the past and flown out people from Houston and from back east to meet with city officials and discuss moving and discuss different packages the city can put together to move the use. And Buckeye is okay with that. In fact, the last couple weeks, actually, Buckeye's representatives have met with Marty Tuttle and other city representatives to talk about transitioning the use to somewhere else. Maybe somewhere at the port would be one of the preferred alternatives, or somewhere else. So Buckeye continues these discussions with the city, but again, if the city's looking to make a deal to move Buckeye and the facility somewhere else, it doesn't really behoove the city to stick them with a knife in the back by making their operations tougher or more expensive. The demolition of the Cemex cement soils is cited as a prime example of the ways the city can transition uses out of there, and we agree. I work for Cemex, and Cemex was actually very complimentary of the city and the job the city did in helping them move somewhere else. Buckeye and Shell and everyone else have not been treated the same, and it's not really the city's fault. Part of the problem is the city doesn't have the redevelopment funds like it did prior, and so there's not the funding to allow this to be a use that's moved as easily. And so as discussions continue to advance on what the city can do to Buckeye to make it a revenue neutral model for them, I think it behooves the city and Buckeye to treat each other with respect and as neighbors, which is what we are. So Buckeye has a vested right to continue its operations, and denying the CUP doesn't change that. Last couple slides I'll put it here is that staff says that the conditional use permit findings can't be made. We respectfully disagree. The first one is that the requested use is in a zone with regulations, in the zone regulations or elsewhere in this chapter, and staff agrees that that can be made. The second is that the requested use is essential or desirable to the public comfort and convenience. I submit to you that this can also be made, especially when you factor in all the different tanker truck trips this is going to cause and the traffic jams it will cause as well. The third is that the requested use will not impair the integrity or character of the neighborhood or not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare. Again, your fire chief said it all when he said that the rail has an unparalleled safety record here as opposed to tanker trucks, which, again, when you add thousands and thousands of them mixed with the residential thousands of trips in an unknown mix, I would submit you're asking for trouble. Buckeye's very concerned about this. They're not their drivers. They come and do and pick up and will deliver ethanol if that's the case. But again, I don't think that the risk is worth it. Finally, I think that the requested use will be in conformity with the general plan. Staff says they can't make this finding. They've made it in the past. Also, the Buckeye facility, and I think this is the key here, is that the general plan does allow Buckeye to be there. It does allow non-conforming uses, and Buckeye is one of those. This facility has always been found in conformance with the general plan. Nothing's changed out there to change that fact. And finally, that adequate utilities and roads and drainage, sanitation, et cetera, can or will be provided. Staff report states that it can't be made, but again, this can be made because if Buckeye stops accepting ethanol delivery by rail, the assumption is incorrect because the finding can be made. The site has all the required infrastructure for this. They have their own rail spur, and it works out just fine. So in summary, just to finish up here, and I'll take any questions you may have for me now or later if you'd like, permit denial means a couple things. It means increased truck traffic in the neighborhood to the tune of thousands and thousands of truck trips. It means increased risk of ethanol-related incidents because, again, you have residential traffic and you have construction there. You have an ongoing traffic impact study. Staff has no idea what will happen. They don't. There's no significant change to the rail operation of 15th Street. Union Pacific has told you this. They've written you a letter to that effect. And again, this is additional operational burden on Buckeye. That's what that means. It just makes it more inconvenient, more expensive, and you'll pay more at the pump for it, frankly. Permit approval means that there is reduced truck traffic on South River Road. An extension request also reduces the risk of ethanol-related incidents and allows Buckeye and the city to continue working together to try and find a solution here. And again, the last thing I would say is this: there's no overriding desire, there's no overriding emergency why you can't just grant additional time extension for a year or 2 years. There's nothing that's forcing your hand here. The Planning Commission, it's up to your discretion whether you want to have an additional year to see how things work out, whether you want to have additional 2 years to see, A, how the residential traffic works out on the McGowan Bridge, how the traffic impact study works out that staff is currently preparing with its consultants, and while allowing a local business and a local employer to continue to operate in the most efficient way possible. Last of all, I would just say that it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to throw all these thousands of trucks on the road without knowing what the implications of that are. Staff is silent on the issue because they don't know. And I think it behooves the city to take that into account and to, if you need to, take a wait and see approach and say, come back in 2 years. And we'll see how everything has worked out there and make a decision there too. Again, that's how the Planning Commission has always dealt with this issue as time has gone on. And I think is a reasonable request, I think, on Buckeye's part. And I think it's mutually beneficial, frankly, with the city and Buckeye as their discussions go forward. So with that, I appreciate your time and thank you for your consideration. I can take any questions that you'd like as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Govan, do you have any questions for the applicant?
I do have one question. Maybe my math might be off here, but I count about 1,200 trips a year through that 15th Street connection by Buckeye. If it's 30 a week, I count about 1,200. So that's far more than nothing. Is my math correct?
Oh, on the 15th
Yes.
Street closures?
I count 1,200 rail cars attributed to Buckeye. Is that correct?
That's
Approximately.
I'm not sure if that's the case or not,
So the
frankly.
letter said about 5 to 6 a day, 5 to 6 days a week, 30 a week. I'm counting about 1,200.
That could be.
Does that sound right?
That's probably correct. Look back and, is that about right? Yes, I think it's probably about right. You can't, again, I think the biggest issue there is that you don't know which of the closures are due to Buckeye and which are due to everyone else. So the permit does allow them 6 a day, 5 days a week on the tanker trucks, on the rail cars, which of course hold more than your tanker truck does.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you.
Shasta.
Thank you for your time. One of my questions is, other facilities in the area seem to be doing similar operations or related operations. Are you the only one using rail, or are there other facilities that are using rail for comparable use?
To my knowledge, I think we might be the only ones using rail, and I'll look to Dave to confirm that or not.
Yeah, the other company that's comparable over there, Shell, brings it all in by truck. They have no rail access.
Okay.
Yeah, Buckeye does have its own rail spur.
So do you do it exclusively via rail, or do you have any truck service that you're currently using?
I believe at times there has been some limited trucks when ethanol is needed. Is that correct? So there has been some limited tanker trucks that come into the facility from time to time when it's needed. Generally speaking, the majority of it comes via rail, obviously.
Commissioner Austin, to help with that point, according to the Air District, last year Buckeye received about 8.8 million gallons of ethanol via truck, which is roughly 30% of their ethanol volume.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thanks.
And you probably don't have this data with you, but what does the safety and environmental record look like for Buckeye facility itself over the last few years of operation, or?
Yeah, actually,
much-
I can have Greg Clark come up, and he actually is the safety manager for the terminal. One of the initial picture I showed you that had the kind of guys at the barbecue, that is a truck driver safety barbecue, because they have when they achieve safety goals. But Greg, did you want to comment on that, on the safety record at the facility?
Please come up. Could you please state your name?
Hello, my name is Greg Clark,
you.
Compliance Manager for Buckeye Terminals.
Jeremy, your question again?
Yeah, I just wondered if you could give us a picture of what the environmental and safety record looks like for your facility. I mean, how many spills do you have a year, that sort of thing,
Or, yeah, that's not something that we really put in yearly terms, because we have an exemplary health, safety, security, and environmental record at our terminal. Since Buckeye purchased the terminal in 2011, we've had 0 lost time safety incidents. Our workers take pride in the work that they do, and I think it shows in our record.
That was 2011 since?
Buckeye purchased the terminal from BP in July of 2011. And we've had no safety incidents since that time.
Thank you.
Should have a barbecue for the railroad guys, too.
We do. We have a driver and appreciation barbecue that we invite everyone to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Moore?
I guess I am on. I'd asked the question about, is there vapor involved with ethanol?
Yeah, actually, when you asked the question, I asked the guys down the line. So there is, they are sealed off, and there are some residual of ethanol in the tanker trucks. The question I asked the Buckeye folks was, does that, from a safety standpoint, does that make them more combustible or less? Is there a difference in safety issues where they're stored and how they're stored, and if they're full or not full? And the answer is that full or not full, they're always treated as if they are full, and that their ethanol rail cars do not explode. If they are sabotaged in some way, or there's an incident, they would burn, but they do not explode. It was the liquefied petroleum gas that explodes and is the more dangerous of the two. But there is some residual ethanol in empty tanks, though, that is sealed off and as it's shipped back to its source.
Is Buckeye still servicing Chevron with their ethanol? That was one of the reasons you had ethanol brought into West Sac. You were taking it and delivering it to Chevron.
That I don't know. I think their
Find out.
customer base is not single sourced, but that it's varied, and so I'm not sure. And so I think it depends on the market and what's needed.
Well, I mean, one of the big issues to me, I mean, first off, I mean, we've talked about, do you need to eventually try to clean up the area? Yeah, we do, you know, and I'll probably never be alive to see the townhouses being built there on the
Hopefully
river.
you will be.
Well, but I mean, you guys are younger than I am, but I'll probably never be around to see that, but eventually that's going to happen. Somebody
Yeah.
will come in and want it worse than Buckeye wants it, and they'll be able to do that. But, you know, I'm concerned a little bit about, you know, what is stored, because these tanks get just stored around town. They don't get hauled away right away. That kind of concerns me. Secondarily, you know, we talk about how many trips are coming in, and we can talk about it however you want to use the numbers, but the real numbers come down to 10 to 15 trips a day, depending on whether you're still servicing Chevron or not. Because half the product that you were bringing in rail cars when you originally got this was to go to Chevron. So you were bringing it in, you were storing it, but then you were hauling it out to Chevron. So now I'm really not sure, and that's why I was kind of asking the question. Are we really using 6 carloads a day, or are we really using 2 or 3 carloads a day?
Yeah, I think it's market driven, and maybe the better question to ask is throughput. How much are they putting through their,
Throughput.
you
Yeah.
know?
So how much ethanol has to go in each tank car, or each truck and trailer load of gas that leaves?
I'm not sure, and again, I would defer to the operations guys as to how much. I don't believe that the throughput has changed, but I'm not sure as far as operationally how many. Tanker trucks
I
equal.
happen to be the oldest planning commissioner that was around when we did that, but I remember that's why we originally brought the rail in here, was not so much for Buckeye, because you used less than half the product, but it was really for Chevron. Okay.
Please state your name.
My name is Andy Anderson. I'm the operations manager for Buckeye Terminals.
Thank you.
So the question is, do we
Are
supply
you still
Chevron?
servicing Chevron?
No, we do not.
Okay,
Since 2011, we have not supplied Chevron with ethanol.
okay. That's one of the reasons we used to bring it in. So how many, you know, I just calculated real quickly. I mean, we talk about thousands of truckloads and all that. We're really talking about 10 to 15 loads a day. I just calculated
Yeah,
it.
that could be an approximate number, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about 10 loads a day coming into the terminal. And normally, when they come in, they bring ethanol in, reload with gasoline and go out?
That not necessarily the case. If they
Could
bring
be.
ethanol, they're an ethanol service, they'll drop the ethanol off and they will go get another load of
Can
ethanol.
we do ethanol through the pipeline?
No, ethanol is not shipped by pipeline.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Guerrero?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I jotted down a few questions I had. One of the assertions I understand is the increased number of trucks, safety issues. And I gather you do extensive training with your truck drivers to make sure that, you know, they drive safely, things like that.
They do. They're not, the truck drivers are not, the drivers are not Buckeye drivers. They are independent trucking companies. And so they come and go to the Buckeye facility. And that would be the case if the CP is denied and ethanol has to be trucked in, they would be a separate third-party trucking company.
Okay. If an accident were to occur, can you help me to understand how that would appear, you know, in the community?
I'm not sure how it would appear in the community. In discussions, maybe the best way to address that is talk about the fire and police department's thoughts on the matter. The Buckeye facility is on both sides of South River Road, and so there are right turn movements, there are left turn movements into and out of the terminals. There are currently no traffic controls for that area. And that's one of the big issues, is where you have truck stacking, which is a big issue even now with the gasoline trucks. Is where would they sit? Where would they stage themselves? And that's without even factoring in ethanol at all. And so one of the main concerns is, where do these trucks, where will they stack? Where will they queue? How do they make that left-hand turn into the Buckeye facility currently? The big issue and the meeting with the city was all about essentially that issue, which is, how do you stage them? How do you make that left-hand turn when you add in the construction on South River Road, which again wasn't mentioned in the staff report, but that's a planned thing with Public Works. And Rick's obviously there on this issue too. But how do they make that left-hand turn safely? What traffic controls can be installed there, if any? And how do you factor in all the residential traffic that are now going to be dumped on South River Road? So I think that an accident there, Buckeye's concern, obviously, as a third party to this, is obviously one of safety and liability. A commuter car, if you look at a Geo Metro or something like that versus a tanker truck, that's an issue, and the car usually loses that battle. Yeah. So that's the concern. It's one of access and it's one of safety, and that's what makes Buckeye nervous about this, is all the unknowns. You don't know how many truck trips are going to be there. You don't know how many commuter trips from the residential neighborhood are going to be there. You don't know what the configuration of the road is even going to look like. Traffic study's still going on, and they asked, obviously Buckeye has commented to the city as to what Buckeye's solution would be as far as the road design. We haven't heard back anything. But again, this is an ongoing discussion. There's a lot of unknowns here that I don't think planning staff knows what's going to happen. Certainly Buckeye doesn't know what's going to happen, and I think it's hard for the city to even guess what's going to happen once you mix all of that together. Which again, it leads us to our point, which is this isn't necessary to kill it off immediately. There's nothing here prompting you to do that. Nothing saying, look, we can't give, let's try it for another year to see what comes of the traffic impact study, for example, and then we go and take a look at it. That's always been the Planning Commission's option, and the decision has always been, let's come back, and as things change out there, let's continually assess what's going on.
I think in moving forward, I appreciate your good neighbor comment in whichever direction this leads, and hope that we can find a collaborative effort to work together on safety issues, because I think that's real important for the community, and to make sure that that's addressed. On some of your conclusions based on the report, I do find some discrepancies in your comments, and one of them is the city manager's points that he made. And he established the priority that the city council made in their retreat, in their January retreat, and that being that the Pioneer Bluff transition is a top priority, and that is something that we have to take into consideration as we make decisions.
Sure. No, I don't disagree, and hence I think that was made very clear to us by Mr. Tilley, also from the very beginning. Of course, we understand, and Buck understands the city's priorities and kind of the long-term vision. Hopefully, the Commissioner Moore is still around when the vision achieves itself. But no, Buckeye's well aware of where the city wants to take the Pioneer Bluff area. I personally am aware of it. I do a lot of work for CEMEX also, and in talking with CEMEX and their experience with the city, they've been extremely complimentary of how the city has helped them to move. And again, discussions are ongoing. Like I said, Buckeye flew a bunch of people out here from Houston and from back east to meet with the city representatives on that very issue. And discussions are ongoing. Again, there was meetings just last week between Marty Tuttle and Buckeye representative on this very issue of how do we get from here to there? Because Buckeye's not opposed to moving it, but it has to be revenue neutral for them. They can't say, yes, city, we recognize that you want this moved, and let us incur millions of dollars of liability to help you achieve that. Buckeye says, hey, help us help you. You tell us how we get this done, and so it doesn't harm us. we can, and they're willing to move. They've taken a look at the port property that the city has put up there as an option or optional area. They've had their engineers look at it as well. They've looked at the existing environmental document for a terminal out there and how that would work in their plans. They've looked at the site itself and actually fit tanks in there. And so it's like I said, discussions are ongoing, and Buckeye doesn't object to that or have a problem with the city's direction. It's just how do we get there? How do we get from here in a way that's mutually beneficial, and how do we handle ourselves in the interim, I think, is the question.
Right, and also listening to our fire chief's presentation on managing risks as his top priority, I take that into consideration as I look to which direction we're going to go with this recommendation.
Sure. I would, the only thing I would add to that is that we have to take a look, and as the chief said, rail has an excellent safety record. Not so much with tanker trucks by comparison. It's not to say that the drivers are reckless or that they're going to be steering all over the road or anything, but anytime you mix road construction, unknown residential traffic, and per year, again, thousands of truck trips per year. Anytime that you have this confluence of all that coming together, I think it cautions maybe the better course of action there until you know what's going to happen. Again, there's a traffic impact study that's supposed to be coming out in a few months. The city doesn't know where that's going to go, and Buckeye certainly doesn't either. And until we have some of these things that are known, it seems slightly foolhardy to say that truck trips are a whole lot safer than rail, when we know the rail is a known quantity, and the safety record is a known quantity on the rail deliveries. And what's not is when you mix residential traffic and the tanker trucks and the road construction and how that's going to work. We don't know that. So,
Madam Chairman, not
Yes.
to interrupt, but there are a number of questions, and I think staff is prepared to respond to them. So I don't know if there are other people who are
I do
looking
have
to
a couple
speak
of
during the public
questions
hearing.
for the applicant. Just 3, actually. Okay. Are you done, Commissioner Guerrero? Thank you.
thanks.
I do have a couple of questions. When you mentioned the number of trucks, 3,900 to 5,900 trucks,
To 5,200.
additional trucks,
Yeah.
so that would replace the average 6 cars per day. Is that where you get the number from?
Yeah, the top number comes from
Because
the.
that's about 15 to 20 trucks a day.
Yeah, so
Okay.
so that's basically where those numbers come from, and
10
like,
to 15 a day.
yeah,
Right.
right.
Okay. And let's see. You mentioned the left-hand turn from South River Road if we went to truck, if you had to go to truck instead of rail. But wouldn't the trucks be going into your blending area, which would be the right-hand turn? Or, because that's where the rail car unload area is
Yeah, so,
currently.
right, so the trucks on, and what I meant to say is Buckeye's on both sides of the road, right?
Correct, right.
And so the trucks come in and they go both directions.
Right, so right now, where the rail unloads, where your rail cars unload, that is on the Jefferson side of South River Road, you could say, that's where the tracks
Yes.
lie.
Yes.
So that's where your rail cars come in, unload into those tank areas, blending area,
Yes.
okay?
For
And-
the moment, I would only add that one of the discussions with the city has been changing that
Okay.
to the other side, or consolidating it on the other side.
Okay.
Again, that's one of the unknowns per the traffic impact study and where that's going to.
Right, but right now, as it stands, you would have to,
Yes.
the
Yes.
delivery trucks of ethanol would have to go, turn right into the facility on that side, unload where the rail cars used to unload, and then whatever your blending is area, and then trucks would be, the regular trucks would continue to access the other side of South River Road.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe that's how it would work should the CUP be denied. I will, of course, look back here to make sure that's the case, which, of course, I may be completely wrong.
Yes.
The fire chief has a few additional points like that. Unfortunately, he does need to depart, so we'd like to offer him the opportunity
Oh,
to
I'm
do that
sorry,
if
Chief.
if you would entertain that.
Okay,
Currently, the trucks turn in right into that side of the terminal, and then it would turn left when they come out to cross traffic.
Okay.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, would those be, what would they be? Would they be empty
Offloading
or
ethanol.
carrying?
It would be full coming in, empty coming out.
Empty coming out, empty coming out. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Chief?
I apologize, I have to leave. My time isn't nearly as valuable as yours, but I did want to clarify, Mr. Chadwick brought up a couple of issues which he's accurate, and I want to clarify my comments. He is correct when he says that the fire department does not determine routes. That's a correct statement. It's Public Works in the city of West Sacramento. We do have access and weigh in on that, but as Public Works, we do have truck routes in the city. We do control the access, both access and egress of trucks throughout the city, and they're done in truck routes, but those are established by our Public Works Department, not the fire department. He's also correct in that we do not pull over trucks. That's the West Sacramento Police Department. Sergeant Marquez could give you an overview of that. I know that we work very closely with him during the Fix 50 project. We got very deep into the movement of vehicles, including trucks, in that process. Lastly, my comment with managing risk was based out of some things that came up here tonight. We're talking about 10, 12, 15 trips a day of trucks. I speculate that those trucks, the movement of light commodities, not exact, ethanol, gasoline in this area of South River Road with the 2 terminals and with the other fueling facility is somewhere in the magnitude of 250 to 275 trips a day. We're talking about adding, by Buckeye's comments, 10 or 12 trips. When I talk about managing risks, that's the risk. That's what I mean by managing risks. We're adding that many more, less than 5% a day. The benefit, as I spoke before, is the ability to have that risk come in through specific routes of egress, which we do control. And that it comes in, it serves its purpose, and it leaves the city. That's not the case today with our tank cars. I'm not disputing safety records of any industry. I'm telling you that is the number one reason that I stand before you, and I have a passion about what you're discussing tonight. That's it. Thank you very much, and I apologize for having to interrupt anybody's presentation.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I have one more question. There was made mention, for the applicant, I'm sorry, there was made mention of cars that are left unattended on the tracks overnight. Do you guys keep a record of this, or?
We know what's at our facility. Union Pacific, as the city well knows, Union Pacific does what it does in terms of storage of cars on the track. So that is not something that we necessarily even that we know about. So.
Right, so it's out of your hands, but at that point, it's in the hands of Union Pacific, whether or
Yeah,
not.
we know if they're empty and sitting in our spur, then we have control over them. To the extent that there are cars that sit on the track empty or full, again, it's not something the city knows either as to if and to what extent that happens. Again, it's a supposition. It's one of the. Go ahead.
Safety
Oh,
manager.
sure, please.
Just, hello.
Hello.
To speak to the up to 6 rail cars that we can have in our rail spur, we're staffed 24/7. Those rail cars are under camera, and we are a regulated CFATS facility. We go through security audits.
Okay.
With Homeland Security.
Yeah, with TSA, Homeland Security.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for clarifying.
So I think that's answers the question. So
Yes.
again, the staff doesn't know, to what extent that there are any cars that sit there, and frankly, neither do we. So again, that's merely a guess.
Well, actually, that's not correct. Within the last couple of years, we have had extensive discussions with both Buckeye and UP has provided us with information. It took a long time to get, but they provided us with specific information that would suggest that on a regular basis, there are anywhere up to 40 cars a day stacked. And that's information provided to us by UP.
Well, Jeff, that's not entirely correct.
Well, it is correct.
Well, no, I'm saying that they said that up to, at some times, that may be the case.
No,
and
they
that
gave
is-
us
that's-
specific numbers.
That is a far cry from saying that there are 40 cars a day, every single day stacked there. That's not what the data says, Jeff.
That is what the data says.
I would respectfully disagree.
Well, okay. They can believe you or they can believe your attorney.
I'd rather them see the data, and the data is not included there. And again, that's not my understanding of my conversation with the UP, that there's not 40 cars there every single day.
Just for clarification, those 40 cars may or may not all belong to Buckeye, correct?
No, this is information from UP indicating that on a daily basis, the number of additional cars that are in West Sacramento that are intended for Buckeye
Okay.
range up to 40 a day, and it is up to 40 a day.
Like I said, up
But on
to,
many days, it is 40, and many days, it's anywhere from 18 to 40.
and it may be 0 some days also. So let's just, I want to be very clear on that, that this is not every day 40 cars there.
Taken, no taken. Thank you. I have no other additional.
So I have one other question, and I appreciate Chief Martinez's comments tonight regarding safety. That is a big concern of mine. And part of your presentation kind of inferred, correct me if I'm wrong, that the jury's out on the safety of bringing that in by truck. But you do have sampling. 30% of what you brought in last year was brought in by truck. Are you aware of any issues with that 30%?
I'll again defer if they want to hit me in the back of the head back there, my client. In terms of trucks, yeah, in terms of truck safety versus rail safety, you know, there's been.
In terms of the 30% that came in, were there
I
any
don't
issues with the trucks that came in last year?
Again, I'll defer to the guy who actually knows.
So the question was just in terms of the percentage.
Any safety issues with the trucks that came in the last year? So we
There were no-
understand that 30% of your volume came in by truck. Were there any issues with safety?
No. Last year, 30% did come in by truck. There were no issues with safety. If you looked at the data from 2 years ago, you would see that a much more significant volume came in by rail, by truck. Last year, it was 30%. 2 years ago, it was 5%. So, I mean, it fluctuates year to year.
Thank you.
So I think the unknown for Buckeye is maybe not, that is a known. I think the unknown is when you mix the residential traffic and the construction and stuff. That's the unknown, I think.
Right. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and I will look to my commissioners to see if you have any comments for staff.
I do have
Jennifer,
one
I thought
question.
staff had a comment to us first.
Yeah, we do have a few points we'd like to make for the commission. We are operating off the best data that we have, most of which was obtained from the Air District prior to the Air District no longer providing that data to us at the request of Buckeye. There were several points that Mr. Chadwick made. He made reference to a traffic impact study. It's actually a mischaracterization. There's a traffic safety plan that's actually already been completed. That all needs to be implemented because the bridge is going to be open here in less than a month. And he also made several, we also concur with him that relocating the facility, is a matter unto itself. And we had one meeting over a year ago, and thus far, there's been nothing has come of that particular discussion. And there was another meeting very recently where Buckeye brought in a lobbyist to actually lobby the city manager for additional time on this use permit. And we want to sort of put the rail also overall in context. So I think it's the biggest problem here. And I'd like to ask my colleague Rick Toff from the city manager's office to sort of talk about rail sort of overall in the city and perhaps, put a little more of Buckeye's portion of that into context for you.
Thank you, David. Rick Toff with the city manager's office. I'm the port business manager, and I can speak to overall rail operations in the city. And so Mr. Chadwick and Union Pacific are correct in their assertion that if this use permit is denied, there will be continued rail traffic across 15th Street. But and you have the letter from UP, and I'll quote from that. UP will continue to move rail cars through the 15th Street crossing regardless of whether Buckeye remains a customer. But what Mr. Chadwick did not describe is the switching activity that is related to those Buckeye rail cars. And that's really because of the proximity of their ethanol unloading rack to 15th Street. So the exhibit that David attached to the staff report and all those rail crossing activations, it's very clear that most of those activations are in fact related to the Buckeye cars that are switching back and forth on the 15th Street. We know exactly how many cars UP moves through the city. The port owns what we call the canal yard in back of Sandcombs Park, and we in fact have an agreement with UP. They pay us per rail car, so we know exactly what those volumes are. They're about 2,000 cars a year. So on a weekly basis, that's about 40 cars. So that's about 9 cars a day, if you will. And it's not a situation where they're switching back and forth. It's one clean through movement in the morning. They go out to the industrial area in the west part of the city, west of the port, and serve their customers there, and they come back, and it's another through situation. So no switching related to that. Secondly, we do have a short line railroad in town, Sierra Northern Railroad, and much the same as the volume that I just described. They have a contract with the port, and currently all their volume is just storage rail at the port, and a very similar volume to what I just described for UP, and again, a through movement through 15th Street, not any switching there. So I think that's an important distinction. So when they say there's no impact on 15th Street, I mean, I disagree with that. 15th Street will obviously continue to activate, but there'll be through movements, and there'll be a tremendous reduction in the switching activity.
Thank you. Commissioner Galvin, do you have any questions for staff?
Not at this time.
Commissioner Austin?
I have no additional questions.
Good.
Commissioner Olson? Commissioner Moore?
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Commissioner Guerrero?
No questions.
I don't have any questions for staff either. I'll look to my commissioners for a motion.
I move to accept the staff's recommendation to reject the requested conditional use permit time extension.
We have one motion to accept staff's recommendation to,
All the 3 recommendations, I think that's
Can I just get
All of the
clarification?
Sure.
clarification.
Your
yes.
motion includes all of the recommended actions?
All the recommendations,
Thank
yes,
you.
sorry. Clarify that.
I moved to second. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I do recognize, I think that the Planning Commission has, as we've acknowledged, has the authority to approve or deny this CUP. And keeping in mind that the last time we approved this was in 2012, a lot has changed since then. And I think that that the Planning Commission is very cognizant of those particular facts. In regards to approving the CUP, I don't see that any of the findings require any additional information, such as, traffic studies or CEQA, and so for that reason, I second Commissioner Guerrero's motion.
thank you, Commissioner Austin.
Can I make a comment also?
Yes, Commissioner
You know,
Moore?
and I have to agree. I think I've been trying to do this, and I was waiting for Buckeye to come in and tell me what their grand plan is to make this better or to reduce some of the workload, and I never heard anything. And when we did this last time, 2 years ago, we said, if you're going to come back here, you got to have a plan. You got to tell us what's going on, why you're going to, are we going to cut back some of the rail use? There is stacking of cars coming in, there's stacking of cars going out. And we are trying to make a difference on South River Road. And I think you're seeing it with the opening of the bridge, you're seeing it with the destruction of the silos over there, the cement silos. This is just one more step. I mean, if there was something we could do to help Buckeye, I'd be all for it, but they have no plan but just to continue like normal. And I don't know that that's going to help us a whole lot in that area. I don't think this one thing stops Buckeye at all. Buckeye stays in operation, and we're gonna take in a couple more trucks every day. But there's a number of trucks that go in and out of those terminals every day, and we're gonna add 10 more to it. It's not a big deal. And if I still had a trucking company, I'd wanna be hauling their stuff. But that's not the issue. The issue is, what are we doing to the area? And we are changing the area. It is making a change. And this is just one itsy-bitsy part of it, but it's probably one that, we need to make at this point. So I would agree with the motion also.
So Charlie, if I could say, I agree with everything you just said, and on top of that, I think the public safety issue is significant. I think having some say and some ability to control traffic pattern, to control what sits in our city at night is very
You're
important.
not going to control
And
a
I-
lot of traffic, Joe, and the reason I tell you that,
Well,
I don't
there's-
want to disagree with the chief, but everything within a certain radius of an interstate freeway is not controllable.
Well,
We can control a little bit, but not a lot.
I hear what you're saying, but as it comes into the city and sits in the city, I think that's a significant piece, and he made a great
That's
point
right.
about that. And beyond that, I think that the city's plan, listen, I've sat in that traffic at 15th Street as those cars are switching, and that is untenable. So I think at least where we're going resolves some of that issue as well.
May I have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Galvan.
Aye.
Commissioner Austin.
Aye.
Commissioner Olson.
No.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Guerrero.
Aye.
Commissioner Perez.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any interested party may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission in this matter to the City Council by filing a written appeal within the city clerk within 15 days of tonight's action, and the appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
All right, moving on to item number 3, public hearing regarding the Promenade vesting tentative subdivision map, conditional use permit, and planning development permit.
Senior Planner Sandra White will present this item.
Good evening, Chairperson Perez and members of the Planning Commission. The Promenade project is located on Southport Parkway, west of the Savannah Apartments and north of the Ridgeway Island subdivision in the Southport Business Park. The 18.3-acre parcel is zoned Multiple Family Residential Plan Development 21. Mandarich Developments is requesting approval of a vesting tentative subdivision map, a conditional use permit, and a plan development permit for a small lot development. The map would subdivide the property into 22 single-family lots, including 2 private streets, 19 private alleys, and 8 common lots. The density would be 12.13 units per acre. A conditional use permit is required because single-family homes are conditional uses in the R3 zone, and a plan development permit is required in that exceptions to various development standards are required to meet the minimum density since the R3 zone standards are suited for multifamily development. And in order to develop the site for single-family residential use at the minimum density, deviations to the minimum lot size, building setbacks, floor area ratio, and open space requirements are necessary for implementation. This is proposed to be a gated community with rear-loaded lots. A homeowners association will maintain the private streets, the private alleys, and all the common areas. A public workshop was conducted on September 18th, where several issues were raised by the public and the Planning Commission, and I would like to briefly focus on density, fencing and privacy, schools and gates. Beginning with density, some of the residents raised concerns regarding the density of the project, which is proposed at 12.13 units to the acre. This site has been zoned for multiple family residential since the adoption of the Southport Framework Plan in 1995. The development in the R3 zone requires a density ranging anywhere from 12.1 up to 25 units to the acre. Secondly, this site has been identified in the city's last 3 housing element updates as being a high-density site that the city count towards meeting its regional housing needs allocation. The housing element anticipated that the site would be developed at 20 units to the acre as opposed to 12.13 units to the acre. Regarding fencing and privacy, the developer originally proposed to install 3.5-foot tall retaining walls with a new 6-foot tall fence on top of the retaining wall between the proposed project and the abutting properties to correct existing grade differences and to eliminate drainage problems. The residents on Cooper Island Road, south of the project site, expressed concern regarding the grade differential between the project site and the existing homes, and also voiced concerns regarding privacy since the new 2-story homes would be constructed adjacent to their backyards. The developer has revised the preliminary grading plans. The grade difference now varies from 1.5 to 2.3 feet as opposed to 3.5 feet. The developer explored the possibility of lowering the site to match the grades with adjacent properties, but the site cannot be lowered any further due to the existing elevation of the point of connection for the existing sanitary sewer. This elevation point establishes the benchmark for the rest of the property in that trunk sewers must have a minimum depth of 4 feet measured from the top of the pipe to the finished grade according to city standard specifications. So for this reason, it cannot be lowered any further. Regarding neighbors' privacy concerns, the developer has added a fourth housing plan that will be constructed on several other perimeter lots that back up to the lots located on Cooper Island Road. The second story will be offset from the build line by approximately 10 to 12 feet, and that side elevation facing those existing family homes will have one window that will be positioned high on the second story, and trees will also be planted between the lots to provide additional screening. Regarding schools, the project's impact on the Bridgeway Island Elementary School has generated some concern in the neighborhood. The project is expected to generate approximately 52 students for grades K through 6, 15 students for grades 7 through 8, and 28 students for grades 9 through 12. The school district indicates that that school has the capacity to accommodate 1,052 students, and as of September, they had an enrollment of 962 students. The school district has indicated that certain grades are impacted, but the overall capacity is not an issue. On October 23rd, the school board approved the planning of additional space at the campus for grades 6 through 8, and they plan to have those improvements completed by August or September of next year. Since school facilities planning falls under the jurisdiction of the school district, payment of school impact fees have been determined to be the appropriate mitigation for impacted schools. The city cannot impose any further mitigation, and we have estimated that this developer will be required to pay over $1 million in school impact fees if this project is approved. At the workshop, one resident inquired if a safe routes to school would be implemented as part of this project. The school is located at the intersection of Golden Gate Drive and Half Moon Bay Circle. This is a T intersection with a stop sign and a striped crosswalk on Half Moon Bay Circle. It does not have a striped crosswalk on Golden Gate Drive, and there has been a need to improve this pedestrian crossing at this intersection for several years, and the Public Works Department Traffic Division has recommended that that intersection be improved with a ADA curb ramp and a striped crosswalk on Golden Gate Drive. And although this is a pre-existing condition, the proposed development will contribute to the need to make some improvements to this situation, since, you know, the project will generate some school children that will likely cross this intersection to get to the school. And as their first contribution, the developer has agreed to install the ADA curb ramp, and the city will stripe that crosswalk. Regarding parks, the Planning Commission raised concerns regarding the lack of a centrally located tot lot, and the developer has eliminated one lot and added a tot lot to the project. And in response to the project's impact on city parks raised in the October 28th email from Laura Jameson, which is included in the email in the staff's memo to the Planning Commission, the developer will be required to pay impact fees. The exact amount of fees have not been determined. However, the Parks Department is working with the neighborhood group from Bridgeway Lakes to expand the playground at the park. And any improvements to the park would be recommended by the park staff, which will, go forward to the Parks Commission and ultimately approved by the council. So it's possible that some of the park impact fees generated by this project may be used to improve the park. And lastly, a couple of members of the Planning Commission indicated that they were not supportive of gated communities. And as part of the original application submittal, the developer did not provide any formal reasoning for the gated entries, but did mention at that September workshop that the project might appeal to single female buyers who may prefer living in a gated neighborhood. The developer has since provided additional information regarding their experience in building a gated community in the city of Vallejo, which is included in staff's memo as well. The city does not have any written rule or policy regarding gated communities. However, there has been a longstanding concern about gates being used to create enclaves and separate communities. And for these reasons, staff is recommending denial of this feature of the project as part of the use permit, and a condition to this effect is included in the conditions of approval. The staff lays out all the exceptions to the development standards that are requested to develop the single-family residential development as part of the PD permit, but I do need to make a correction. The staff report mentions that a minimum front setback would be 7 feet, it would be 5 feet. In conclusion, all the findings can be made for recommending approval of the vesting tentative map, the conditional use permit, and the plan development permit. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission conduct a public hearing, certify that the Planning Commission has reviewed and considered the proposed mitigated negative declaration, and approves the mitigated negative declaration as presented by staff, and that the mitigated negative declaration reflects the independent judgment of the city as lead agency under CEQA, approve the requested vesting subdivision map, conditional use permit, and plan development permit subject to the conditions and findings as identified in the staff report and in the memo that's before you, and adopt the mitigation monitoring plan for the implementation of the adopted mitigation measures. I am available to answer any questions that the Planning Commission may have, and also the developer would be making a presentation to the Planning Commission as well.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm going to ask my commissioners to hold their questions for you till after, and I'll go ahead and open the public hearing and ask the applicant to come forward.
Good evening. My name's Gary Mandarich, and last time I met with you, I gave you a brief presentation, and at that time I did not make a presentation about gated communities versus not gated communities and our extensive experience in that realm. So what I would like to do is touch on a few of the points and why we do things in the way we do and how it benefits the community and allows us to be competitive in the marketplace. Okay, so well, a little more, about, for those that did not attend the last meeting, our company has been, was formed in 1996. Prior to that, I was the president of a large home building corporation, and my role with that corporation was to do developments for that company. It was MDC Holdings, and under that role, I developed over 10,000 lots in several large master plan communities, including one of the top 10 communities in the United States, Rock Creek Ranch, which is outside the city of Boulder. So within these large master plan communities, we had a variety of homes and different types of uses, including your conventional detached homes, that had public streets, and that was one buyer profile. And then you would have townhomes, condominiums, and everything would work as a unit, okay? So then in 96, when we started our company, our first acquisition was to buy a failed project in the city of Tracy. So a large developer from Southern California, the Lusk Corporation, developed the land for 136 Paseo-style condominiums. They put a pool in a rec center. It was not gated. So we bought that project from Bank of America, and one of our first actions was to go to the city and get it gated. So we were taking a project that was failed and, in our mind, put a key element in it to make it successful. So the difference between having gated and non-gated was that you had private facilities within that community, a pool, houses, paseos, similar to what we have here, but it wasn't restrictive for the people that were paying for it. It was open to the general public that people didn't want to buy. You know, they didn't want others to use something that they were paying for. The project was very successful, and that was before the boom. So that was, 97, 98. So we did that. And then we followed it up with another project that failed that we bought from a group out of Germany. That was in Fair Oaks. So that was a small enclave of lots. It wasn't gated. The lots were finished, but it was failed. So we bought the lots, and it's on Hazel, right across from McCooney's. You may have seen it. We put an elaborate gate in there, but we did that so that the people that would go into the community wouldn't have direct access to the open space in the back of the community. They did have access elsewhere to get to the open space from a park and nearby in a place to park, but that would keep people from going through the community. So we bought that, got gates approved from the county, and it turned out to be a successful project. And that was in 2001. And then we went to the city of Vallejo, and we did a single-family detached conventional project. No gates, but there was a lot of detached conventional projects in that area. And in that area, it was fine. I mean, we were not required to do parks. The streets were public. Things were maintained in that manner. And the residents within that community got to use the parks that were built and maintained by the recreational district. So it was similar to what you may have at a Bridgeway Island or some of your other master plan communities. Then, so on the first project we did there was called Tiara, 190 townhomes. And the Planning Commission recommended against gating it. Okay, in the discussions during the hearing, but one of the head planners said, we think that maybe Gary's right, with his experience, let's go ahead and gate it. We did, and it was a very successful project. And the type of buyer profile is what you need to understand when you're doing this kind of community. So when we're talking about the promenade, okay, you have a certain buyer profile similar to Tiara, the one in Tracy, the Village of Summergate. Then we did another project, high-density detached project, and it was 134 lots. So the Planning Commission approved it as a gated community with restricted hours. So they said, okay, you got to have the gates open from, I think it was 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Okay, so that it wouldn't feel like it was isolated from the rest of the community. Similar comments that were made by the Planning Commission. Now, we did not, and I'll tell you in a minute why we didn't put all these arguments in history before you, okay, the last time, or to the city staff, is because we did not see an ordinance that prohibited gates, nor did we ever have a suggestion that gates would not be approved. In fact, when we first came into the city, our first question was, because of our history, was, is it okay to gate this community? Because we know what is successful and what is not. And time and again, and I gave you copies of the memorandums and the specifics that were told to us that this project could be gated. So we went forward, we spent over $200,000 in planning, legal, soils, you name it, to, architectural plans, okay, to make this. But back on Hyde Park. So the gates were open, and what we found was that we were closed out in 2006. But I stay on the board usually for a couple of years later so that the homeowners get my experience on how to do things, so it's a smooth transition. So what they found is people would come from the other neighborhoods, and they love going to our parks, right, versus the public parks, okay? And then what they would do is hang around, and they would take up parking that was meant to be for the homeowners, and they used the equipment, and they hung around, and, teenagers would do what teenagers do, okay? In these private parks. Then in 2008, we went back to the Planning Commission, and we said, hey, here's what happened. And they said, okay, we got the history of it. You can't keep the gates closed all the time. Now, when you start talking about quality communities, I mean, Hyde Park or the one across the street, Belvedere, they're the best that there is. I mean, we've won first place awards in San Francisco. We won second in the nation for Belvedere. I mean, our whole MO is to be a boutique builder, building a very nice community. We're not just home builders. If you look at any of our stuff, including the Orchard that we sent you the website to. Okay, so the Orchard is another project that we just finished up, and that's 85 townhomes. And likewise, it gets the buyer profile that wants to live in that type of community that you would not get in a single-family detached environment. Okay, from there, I do have a little slide show and these points so you can see some examples of what we've done. Okay. So up on the screen now is, excuse me, I'm a little hoarse this week, but up on the screen there we have the location of Belvedere. So that, it's just, I'm sorry, Promenade. Belvedere was only mine there. The Promenade, okay. Let's see if this thing works. Left, right, we'll get it. Oh, okay. So, it's reiterating the points that we've talked about. Now, we think that this one, unlike Hyde Park did not have a clubhouse and a pool. Well, we believe that, you need to do everything to sell homes. I think you all know that, sales within the Sacramento region, is just a fraction of what it was in the peak times. And it's very difficult for a private builder to be in this business. During the last 8 years, there's only 20% of the private builders still in business that were in business, okay, in 2004. So, as a private builder, we have to be unique to compete with the large public builders, and the funds they have. So we're unique in that everything we do is specialty. Now, if you look at the results of how we do business, we've always been able to compete with the public builders and exceed them, but we know how to put the elements together in the community. And if you went to any of them, you'll find that the homeowners are extremely pleased with the environment we created and what we do. But in this one, you got the clubhouse and the pool, which we believe that if you open the roads to a public element, that you're going to have people from outside the community want to go into that clubhouse, use the gym equipment, get to the pool, and some will slip through. Whereas if they're in the association, we have mechanisms to control them with card keys and everything else, right? And it just won't be as set up to be a liable element for the HOA. Okay. Okay, so on the profiles that we're talking about, by doing these type of communities, you kind of capture a different broad market. So what we do get is this is a group of people that were in our Tiara project, and you get young professionals. And the reason you get young professionals, they don't want to take care of their yards. They want low maintenance. That's what we're providing here. And they want a nice quality product. In fact, I think this gentleman here worked for the county building department. He says, hey, you know what? Mandrich is one of I think he said the best builder we've ever had. As for the quality of the construction of the units, and he bought out in Tiara. The lady down the left is a retiree, and we had downstairs masters master homes, and we appealed to them. Oh, back on our plans too, the new plan that Sandra talked about, we did introduce a downstairs master so that when you have townhomes and so forth, a lot of times you get a lot of people that want to buy, but they don't want to go up the stairs. And since that plan was developed, the Plan 4 that she's talking about, we have developed another plan, the Plan 5, okay, which has 2 masters, one down and one upstairs, so that you can, what we find is there's a lot of times that they might have an older parent, right, that wants to move back into them, but they still want to be secluded. So we've developed that house as well. So, to be competitive, we have to go at all aspects of what the homes work like, what profiles we're going after. And so, what we do have too is we do have a lot of single parents in this type of environment with 1, 2 children. And they like this environment because they feel safe. Now, I know there's an argument about whether you're safer in a gated community or you're not safer, all right? Well, I really don't want to argue that, and what we do have is, actual records that show that you get a little more vandalism when you have a non-gated community, burglaries, a little more of those, and I'm not saying that that's the differentiation about crime. Okay, this is the first project I was talking about, the Village of Summergate. So the previous builder had the models built and a few homes, and with the trellis arrangement. So we put a trellis to match the architecture with gates at the front. And we did all pavers so it would have a nice appearance. So that's the Village of Summergate in Tracy. Okay, Hyde Park. Well, Hyde Park, you can see, is a, it has everything, but there again, that's the one that the gates were opened part-time. There's a typical playground there, and there was actually two parks similar to what we're proposing out there that became something that everybody wanted to use and created a problem. And these homes here are high-density detached homes, similar to what we're proposing, except this is a bigger square footage. So these were more expensive. And what we're targeting here on this project is homes in the, in the low 300s, where this project started in the 600s. Okay, this is the project we just finished, and the density on this project of townhomes is 10 units per acre. Now, each one of these townhomes have their own backyard, fenced backyard, and it's gated, and you can see we have a nice light-looking gate. It is right off of Penryn Road, and it accesses from Boynton Road, the frontage road. And these townhomes were priced in the high 200s to, well, they went to 400. So I guess in a nutshell, we know probably better than anybody around. Okay. I can't think of another builder, whether it's public or private, that has done as many high-density, detached or attached, maybe excluding the bay. We don't really follow the bay in this area that we've done. And, we're fighting to be competitive, and we believe that you need it to be competitive. We believe that by having it as an open community, we're all asking for problems. You do have some projects here in town where there are similar density, private streets, and there's been an inadvertent burden on the homeowners association. So both in the Ironworks and Lindenwood. Okay, so there are problems in those two projects. You probably know them already, okay? But, Lindenwood, they have minimal amount of parking, and they do have to have private security come through and tow cars. And that's the same thing at Ironworks. In fact, I think Ironworks had to come back to the city and get some special permissions to free up half of their spaces for guest parking and half for overflow parking for the residents. And then they charge people, right, that live there an additional, I believe, $150 a year to get a special parking pass. So it gets back to access to private roads that the public's using, that in this case Ironworks is paying for. Okay, and then on the letter, I went through your comments the last time. You don't know who I am. I'm new to you guys, but we hold our head high about taking advice and acting on it. So this gentleman here said, go get your sons out there, go out there, meet the people on Cooper Island Road, so we did. And here's what we found here too. We'll get this going. So what she was talking about before, we went in some of the backyards. Okay, well, let's see, and we found that their objection was that when you got in their backyards, if we had a two-story element up against our fence, that you would look up at the two-story element. Okay, so we went back to the architect and said, hey, we've got a... I got it. So we went back to the architect and we developed a house, as Sandra said, right? So that the second-story element was pushed back 10 to 12 feet. Now, what she did mention on the facade picture you see, it looks like there's a window coming back. That's not a window. The windows are off to the side. So in those architectural plans you have, that's just some facade that looks like shutters, but that does not have glass there. So nobody is looking into their backyard. That's just a point of clarification. And then we've agreed to landscape along there. That's the clubhouse, okay? And so that looks like a window on the end of that. That building, that's not a window, that's just shutters. Okay, windows are off to each side. Now, this was then a picture of what you would have with a reduced retaining wall height and a fence on top of it. So what we typically do when we build these types of fences, when they're on both sides, we do them with alternating panels. Now, a problem you have with wood fences is that the wood post is what rots early or deteriorates. So we've committed to put steel posts for all the fence supports. Now, we did go into a backyard, and this is the house that's furthest down towards Southport. So that buyer was like one step ahead of me, and they realized that there was a problem from the grade differentiation between the promenade parcel and their backyard, and this fence they already built. So this is an actual photo of what they did in their backyard, which is what we'll be continuing. And you can see they built some planters into it, and the elevation at the top of that fence is approximately the same elevation that we're going to extend all the way through the project. Okay, I think that's all on the slideshow. There was an additional memorandum put out, okay, that each one of you got from Sandra. And Laura Jamison, I think we've touched on that, what she said. which she was concerned about the schools and parks, right? And Sandra really explained how that was being handled. So that was on her letter. On Melissa's letter, which is attachment number 2, I don't think she understands the zoning that's on the ground right now. Okay, that's just, I think she thinks it was part of the industrial or business, so that letter doesn't apply, okay? And there was a phone call. Well, density, we're the lowest density you can put on the ground, so, I mean, I think if he wants less, then it would have to be rezoned. And then on ours, number 4, our letter contained 3 elements to it, and one of them had to do with the development agreement, and I think the interpretation by the city attorney is most likely correct. So we're not going to debate whether or not it's really, you have an argument in the development agreement. That's not our argument at all. The only argument we really have is, hey, we've done this, we're an expert at it, okay? We want a community that works, we're paying more than our fair share, okay? And, we would like to have the approval of the project. We've worked on it now I contacted Michelle about a year ago. So we started negotiations, and we've been working on this project for a year with different house plans and layouts, and we're ready to move forward and do a project that is successful, and one that we will be proud of, like all of our developments, and one that you'll be proud of, in your city. So within my letter, we've already touched on the other points.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Myers.
thank you so much.
Thank
If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Do my commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Austin?
I do have, I've got a comment. I just wanted to say thank you very much. I think that I think the workshop really worked exactly how it was intended to work. I think that people provided feedback, and it sounds like, in my mind, that staff and the applicant have both done a really good job of being responsive and looking into some of the issues they've raised. As we've identified, some of the issues that were raised are really not related to the development. They're pieces that can be addressed through schools or public works or other components. So really, thank you very much for the work that you've done. I do want to reiterate that both Commissioner Liebing and myself did express concerns about the gated communities at the workshop, and so I'm curious to see, I know that was my opinion at the time, it remains my opinion, but I'd be curious to see what the other commissioners' positions are on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Austin. Commissioner Olson?
Can your development go forward without a gate? I'll just ask you straight out. Can it happen without a gate?
We'd have to almost start back over and do new market studies, appraisals, and think about a lot, because it is a very difficult environment. Even our lenders that we have lined up, we presented it just like we have the other projects. I mean, when you're trying to get money together, you have to show them something you've been successful at, and we could not show them a history of being successful without the project being gated. So it's really just not my call. I'd say, there's a lot of people involved in getting the financing and selling and marketing, and when you're a hands-on builder and you're dealing with the people that live in the community, we're not like just build and run. You've got to sell the consumer on what you have, what they're paying for. And it's hard to tell the consumer you're paying for the roads twice, That's a hard sell. You've got a $115,000 per year assessment on this property already, and you got to do everything to fight to have a successful project.
That's a pretty solid maybe.
I don't think it's a maybe. I'm not.
I think I understand.
I mean,
what you're saying.
look, if I would have said maybe, I wish you would have told us no a long time ago. When we came in and said, "Do you have a gate ordinance?" You said, "We have a gate ordinance," because we would have picked up our our toys and went somewhere else. But at no point in time until last Friday did we hear that we couldn't have a gate.
We don't really have a gate ordinance or not have a gate ordinance, but we don't have a great deal of gated communities.
No, but you do have some. I mean, it's not.
We have
We have
one.
some, yes. It's like 1% or 2%, I would think.
Well-
It's not a prominent feature in the new developments at all.
Yeah, but see what happens is, if you have a conventional house with a front yard that's removed from the street and a private backyard, it's a completely different animal. You know, what we have is 12 units per acre, where at Bridgeway, you may have an average density of 4 units an acre or 3 units an acre. Is completely different. Or even in, we'll say what Sino's doing right now, right, at Serenity Cove, or what Ovation Homes is doing, it's different. It's not the same. There's public streets, there's setbacks with the garage in the front, and a private backyard. The private backyard for these people is the community. It's not, that's what it is. Okay?
Commissioner Moore?
You know, Gary, I have to tell you the truth, I actually agree with you. I think you should be gated. But if you're going to gate him, or if you're not going to gate him, then are we going to have public streets, or are we going to widen these streets so they're a decent size? I mean, you've asked, and I'm turning to Sandra now, to be honest with you, because, I mean, you've asked him to put up narrower streets than what we conventionally have in our community. And the community would buy into, yes, I want to have this community, and this is how I want it, but we're going to have narrower streets and not a lot of parking and everything else. And don't you think we should have normal streets if you're telling him not to gate the community?
No,
Why
this.
would you think it differently?
Well, let me add in on this,
No,
okay?
I'm not asking you, I'm back to my staff
Oh, no, ask
now.
them, okay, fine.
Because I think Sandra needs to answer why we would have narrower, or David can, I guess. I mean, I'm not trying to, but I mean, why would we have narrower streets? Why wouldn't we have conventional streets if you're saying take down the gate?
Well, I think in this project is actually, comparable to several past projects the commission has approved. I was just jotting down some notes here between Riva, Lindenwood, Ironworks, Metro Place, Washington Square, Harriet Lane, and Regatta, all projects that weren't gated and have private interior streets.
And most all of those have problems that I've heard of from the people that live there. They all complain about stuff.
Yeah, and I could tell you from my experience of having been on the board at the Riva Homeowner Association, that the people that we towed were people that were fellow owners primarily.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm just not trying to, I was trying to get away from that kind of stuff. And I know what you're saying, David. I've heard the same kind of complaints from people that have lived on others. But I mean, this gentleman has brought forward a project that has some real nice amenities to it. I could understand why you would want to gate this community. And if we weren't going to gate it, then I think it should be just a standard everyday street and everything. Now, that's my opinion.
Yeah, most of these projects do have some type of modified internal streets. They're never set up to be public streets, from the get-go. I mean, they are neighborhoods somewhat unto themselves, and,
Okay.
this is not that dissimilar
So
to
if
many of
you
these
were-
other projects.
If you were asking my opinion, and I'm glad you didn't ask this. First off, I think if you're gonna do this, I think you have a grand idea. I really think you should have had a senior community with single-level things, and it would have been something this community desperately needs, and would have been even better, because we wouldn't have impacted the schools or anything. But since you don't, I have to think that, I happen to like every part of your project. I think it's just a really nice project for the area, and completely different than anything else we offer out there.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Commissioner Guerrero?
I also like your project. It's a very nice project, and I'm glad you're here and trying to work with us on what it is we'd like to see in our community. I run through that community in my morning, afternoon, evening jogs. I find it to be a very safe community and really family-oriented. When you presented the idea that it was gated for the safety reasons, in my mind, I did disagree and just kind of thought about it a little more. I didn't say anything at the time. And I understand that, that's a, valid point you made, that it was not thoroughly addressed by maybe all the commissioners, including myself. But I do have a concern excluding, members of the community, because there's this gated community area. And it's perception of, of how we build our neighborhoods. And I'd like to see our future neighborhoods built in a way that, or developments built in a way where it's open and exclusive, and inclusive, I mean. And I understand your concerns around, what it is you're planning on building, and you do have a lot of expertise in the area, I can see from, what you've provided, and the sensitivity around, what you were planning on and getting it financed. However, in getting these things approved and moving forward, it's something that we have purview over. And that's always a factor, I think, as you're getting things financed. So I just wanted to, Commissioner Austin was interested in some feedback, and I, wanted to make sure that I expressed my thoughts on this clearly. In looking at the school impact fees and the timeline, I recall we talked a little bit about the timeline of the development of some of the homes, and it was going to be rolled out in phases.
Correct.
And so it's not going to be all 223 homes built in, all at once. Can you kind of help me to understand, like?
Well, I would
over a
think,
period of
with the
time?
current market conditions, all of our studies have shown that you're only going to sell about 40 houses a year here. Okay? Now, things can change, but I don't see interest rates going lower. And unless there's a real job formation, which we all would like to have, right? It's going to be tough sledding, So it's not like rush in there and build 200 houses. It's not going to happen, and.
Well, it's good, it's trying to understand the concerns from the residents about, everybody coming in at once, and we have all these people coming in and impacting our schools. I'm thinking that it's not going to happen, overnight. It's going to be over a period of a few years, and given the schools a chance to build and develop.
To build new facilities, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I really like the project. I really like your project. I think the fact that we don't have very many, we don't have any requests to speak, goes to show that you must have, alleviated all the questions that, that the workshop, those that came to the workshop had. So I commend you on that. That was, because we did have quite a few people here. I'm not particularly opposed to gated communities. I think myself and Commissioner Moore are the two oldest members that have lived here in West Sacramento the longest. And I live on the north side, so I live in the area where there is a gated community, and I've snuck in there a couple of times to walk my dog. It's beautiful. It's not something that I would move into. It's, not my taste. But I do understand that there are people that prefer a gated community, and I think that this is a very well thought out plan, and I would just like to thank you for putting so much thought and
Thank you.
into this and into alleviating the questions that your future neighbors are going to have. So those are my only comments.
Look, everything we do is anal. If you look at any one of our projects, our competition, they go, we don't get it. Everything is, well, if you look at our landscaping palettes in all of our communities, you will not see that in any other community. You look at Hyde Park, it looks like Bouchard Gardens, okay? We do that because it's not just a house, it's a community. And it's not just a money-making deal, it's a family business. and other family that are, Robert's really part of my family. He's worked for me for 25 years. So, you know, he's my brother, okay? But we do things with everything that way. It's just the nature of who we are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, since
Commissioner Galvin?
everybody's, it sounds like the linchpin, because I think we all agree that this project is a very nice project. And I concur, it sounds like all the issues were alleviated, the linchpin seems to be the gate. So since we're kind of going out, put our cards on the table, we're with that, I don't have an issue with gated community. We have gated communities, they've been nice facilities, I've never heard of those being issues in the areas that they're in with regards to blending into the community. I think we have one by OLG, that's a small gated community. I know some of those folks really well. They're upstanding, active members of the community. And so I don't have an issue with the gate as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Galvin.
I'd like us to kind of look at a discussion of,
Can I go ahead and close the public?
oh, yes.
I'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and we'll go back to discussion.
Yeah, so in regards to the gate, it seems like we've got a couple of different options of addressing this. It sounds like we have folks kind of on both sides of this gate, and the way I see it, there's three issues, there's three ways of looking at this. Approve it with a gate, approve it without a gate, approve it with a gate that's only open during certain periods, and I submit a fourth option, which would be my option, approve without a gate as per staff recommendation, with the opportunity to put in a gate should the applicant determine that it is indeed reducing, their ability to sell homes, and that's something that we can revisit later. One of my concerns is this: it's not so much what you're bringing up is really an issue of your business plan. It doesn't necessarily work with your business plan. From my perspective, I'm trying to represent the entire community, and this isn't just an issue of aesthetics, and it's not just an issue of business plan. In our community, there's definitely, in my mind, a visceral divide when you feel like you are in or you are out. And it makes me very concerned when we have a gated community that, again, there's people who are in and people who are out, and people on this side and people on that side. So for me, it's not just about good planning or bad planning. It's not just about business plan or whether it financially works. For me, it really is an image. And so even if we approved building a gate that was only open during certain hours, the fact that there is a gate, to me, speaks to kind of social inequity that I don't want in my community. So that's my personal perspective, but proposing those kind of four options, I propose again to kind of weigh in with some of my commissioners on how they might stand on what I see as four options and see if there's other options.
Well, so what I got is that this development hinges on this gate, right? I mean, there's no flexibility there. You can come back up if.
We can't, because it's closed.
Oh, sorry. So, it looks like a deal killer if, we don't allow them to put up the gate.
So
Ready to do that?
that's in my general neighborhood. I respect your insight in that. I don't see it as that. I live in that neighborhood, and I certainly wouldn't feel left out having that gate in the neighborhood. I think.
I wouldn't either, Joe. I mean, I'm not a big proponent of gates, and I wasn't a big proponent of it when we had it over in Broderick. And I thought it was a wrong idea to do, and yet that's what we did. It turned out to be okay, but on top of everything else, I mean, if you're going to change at the last minute like this and change it from a gated community, I would have wanted to talk about the width of the streets and make them standard streets. There's a whole bunch of stuff that, is different than what is being proposed here, as far as I'm concerned. And you go over to Lighthouse or whatever it's called now, but you go over there, they have normal streets and normal everything. We don't have that here, and you're asking something special. And one of the things that I do know is sometimes people buy into a gated community, not because it's gated and it's super elitist and everything else. I'm never allowed in a gated community, so it's okay, I understand. But I mean, they go in there because the husband travels and he wants his wife to feel a little safer, so he buys into a gated community or something. Or you have children. I can understand some of that, and we don't have that opportunity available to us in our town today. And I just think that while I totally understand that we keep it open, I'd rather see it open everywhere. I think I would have liked to, if we thought we were gonna have an open community or an open facility here, I really wish we would have talked about it a long time ago, because I wouldn't have been wanting the narrower streets and the lesser parking. I would have asked for everything to be standard to our city standard. So while I can appreciate the idea of having the community open and not having gates anywhere, I also understand that in a few instances, this might be an acceptable thing. It would not be my standard procedure anywhere. I would prefer it to be open everywhere. But in this one case, I could see that it makes sense. And so I wouldn't be opposed to it being gated.
I agree with you, Commissioner Moore. I have the same, almost the same exact thoughts. I think it is a really good opportunity and for people coming in or current residents, an option for them that we don't have in other areas anywhere else in the city. So I would take each plan like this on a case-by-case basis. I don't think there should be gates everywhere, but in this particular instance, I have no issues with the gate, and I think that it would work really well for this development. Commissioner Guerrero, did you have any comments?
I do have a question on how we arrived at having a gated community in the city at this point in time. Sandra, if you can provide me with a little background on the history around that?
That was done after, from my understanding, months of debate and conversation amongst the city leaders. And in exchange for having gates in private streets, the developer was required to allow public pedestrian access in the rivers known as the Lighthouse community during the daylight hours. So that's how the gates came about for the Lighthouse project.
And I can add, since I was there at the time, back there with Charlie, the project had sat vacant for years, and the developer came and made a very strong pitch to the council that it would never be able to be developed, and had years of experience of apparently being unable to develop it. And I know for a fact the council was very reluctant at the time to approve gates.
And
I agree with
that
you.
area does have gated, I mean, that division, that housing division does have a gated section, and there are
Open
houses,
sections.
open sections.
That's correct.
And like you said, there are pedestrian, access during the daylight hours, but.
So that makes some sense to me with regards to open during certain hours of the day. It's also, I guess, a compromise.
Right.
to having gated.
If we have no other comments, I guess I would.
Actually, I didn't get to ask my questions on this project because we kind of just stuck with gates and that's all we wanted to talk about. I actually had two questions for you, Sandra. One is, the map we received the other day kind of talks about landscaping. You know, the only thing I see is we could do landscaping next to our neighbors, and it's all ground cover. There's no trees, there's nothing in it. Am I reading this thing correctly? I'm sorry? I don't think your microphone's on. Sandra, I don't think your microphone's on, because I couldn't hear you.
There will be some trees planted between the properties. If you look on attachment number 9, your staff report, if you see.
Well, I'm
the-
looking at this thing that you sent the other day to the house. It was separate. I don't know what number it would be, but all of it appears to be ground cover next to the neighbor. There's trees all around all the other homes, but these little things, which, yeah, but that's clear up by the other part. Down here where the homes are, they have all these little green boxes. Public hearing's closed.
Oh, okay.
So if all those little green boxes are there, that means, according to what I'm reading, this is all ground cover and shrubs.
That is correct. That is correct, but I think that it probably got left off of this landscaping plan, because if you look on attachment 9 of your staff report, it does show that trees would be located on,
Hang on a second, hang on a second.
this one here.
I don't know how I would know that.
It's hard to tell.
I don't know how I would know that by attachment 9, except it shows trees around the
It does
house.
show, that's true. We can add
But
it to the
even
issue.
on attachment 8, kind of shows the same thing, I think.
Attachment 8 is just a reduced version of what you're seeing here.
Yeah,
We
but
can add a
everything along the neighbor's property
We
line
can
is
add
all
it-
ground cover.
We can add a condition that the landscaping shall include trees.
Well, and, yeah, but I don't know how much room they've got. You know, I mean, isn't it predicated on how much room you have before you can put a tree up?
They
And
can
I
still
just
put-
don't know the answer to any of that. But I was concerned about absolutely no trees or, you know, because the way I understand it, you try to put a tree up, a tall pine tree, a bushy tree, whatever, and it kind of just blocks the view a little bit and makes it a little bit more comfortable for the neighbors. And I just don't see that, so I was concerned about that aspect. Right here, this is where the
Oh, the little
neighbors are.
boxes, right, okay.
And I don't see any trees by the little neighbors. So, that was my one question that I thought I had. And my other question, you know, you answered most of it, and I talked to David earlier today about the school issue and how they were handling the school. But one of the other issues that came out of our last meeting was there was a little danger in that area in the crosswalks. And I didn't know if we were talking to Public Works or the developer or whatever, that maybe you put flashing lights in
That's a good idea.
when the kids are crossing,
I
or
mentioned
what
that-
we could do to make that a little better.
That was mentioned as part of my presentation with regard to safe routes to school. At the intersection, it's the T intersection, and it has a crosswalk, one crosswalk on Half Moon Bay Circle, but there's no crosswalk on Golden Gate. And so in talking with our traffic division and Public Works, they recognize that there's some improvements that should be made to make it
Okay.
safer. So the developer has agreed to install an ADA ramp, and then the city's gonna,
Try to stripe it a little bit.
we're going to stripe it.
You know, and I
So,
don't know the answer, because you'd have to talk to the people that talked to us last time we were here. And it's not necessarily the applicant's problem, but eventually it'll be the applicant's children that are going to that school. And I'm still concerned because they said that they've had a number of near misses out there. And I think we need to talk to Public Works a little more, saying, are we sure we're doing everything that we can?
I've done that. We
Okay,
have done
thank
that. And so this is a problem that predates the project. We can't put the whole burden upon them to resolve it, but they are making some contribution.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so their contribution
Oh,
is
yeah,
to
we
install
can.
the
We
ramp.
put all the burden on him. Jeff he's here to back us up. But no, it's okay. Maybe your applicant wants to tell you how he has trees next to the side, but I don't see it.
Okay.
I wasn't counting trees. I just noticed there was no trees.
Do you know, okay.
What if I got that wrong? It did say.
Is this the one?
That's the one.
There you go. Yeah.
That's
I'm
the one
sorry.
that was missing.
Okay.
Okay.
I sent you regarding the landscaping, and that the area backing up to the bridgeway, there will be trees. I sent you the wrong one. I'm sorry, I
Okay, fine.
apologize.
Well, now you gotta hold it up for everybody.
No, she's gonna make this, you can do that.
Oh, wow.
Try. Sean?
There
A
you go.
little bit, but not as,
So is the bottom part of it then, Sandra, is that the part that's gonna go against the neighbors?
Against the existing neighbors.
these are the trees. These are the lots. This is the alley, and then you see the
Right,
trees.
but that's up against the neighbors then?
This is on the project side, yes.
Well, and I just thought that was important, but I didn't see it
Yeah,
here,
I'm sorry.
so.
I apologize, I sent
That's
the wrong
okay.
exhibit.
You don't need to. No. Thank you. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, motion?
I'd move that we go ahead with the approval minus Section 6 under the Planning Division.
We would ask that the maker of the motion include the recommended changes in the memo as well, be included in your motion. We want a couple of modifications to some conditions and also to delete a couple of duplicative conditions.
Right, anything related to,
And then furthermore, regarding the gates, if the commission is inclined to approve the project with gates, we would ask that the motion include a requirement to have an Opticon system on those gates so that they can be automatically opened by the police when they arrive. All their cars are equipped with that system.
I'll move as the secretary recommend.
And if I can ask one clarification, the recommended action includes the certification of the neg deck, the negative declaration.
I didn't hear that, Jeff.
The
The negative declaration, that the motion includes the CEQA action.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the entire section of approval except for 6 and everything David mentioned.
Is that clear, David?
Let me read, let me to.
Jeremy,
read
is
condition.
that with the gate or without the gate?
Except for Section 6 and all
I
the
mean,
gates.
condition number 6? Yeah, we would propose to actually modify that condition to say that if gates are provided, that it would include the Opticon system.
We agree.
Do we want
Yes.
to, do we want to consider some hours of having them required to be open?
I don't think you should. I think that's up to the applicant to figure out if that's necessary. I mean, I wanted the gates open all the time over in the rivers, but that didn't, it turned out not to be a wise choice because they were having problems over there.
And
So depending on the way the vote goes, I'm wondering if that would be a difference maker to some of the folks who were opposed to the gate. That's the only reason.
Okay.
So I guess if you want to move the vote as it is.
Well,
So I'm wondering if, depending on which way the vote goes, I'm just wondering if consideration of open hours would be a difference maker to folks who are against the gate.
Oh, I see.
I just throw it out there, but
Right.
Madam Chair, whatever you want to do.
Thank you, Commissioner Galvin. I would go with Jeremy's motion.
just to eliminate the
Just to
section, and we have a gate now.
Correct, so we do have a gate now.
With an Opticon system?
With the, I'm sorry,
With an Opticon system.
Opticon system?
with an Opticon
All
system.
right, may we have a roll call vote, please?
I
No,
sec-
second.
I seconded.
Okay. Commissioner Moore,
Aye.
Commissioner Olson,
Yes.
Commissioner Guerrero,
No.
Commissioner Galvan,
Yes.
Commissioner Austin,
No.
Commissioner Perez.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Any interested party may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission in this matter to the City Council by filing a written appeal within the city clerk within 10 days of tonight's action, and the appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, public workshop on the transit-oriented development strategy, initial parking analysis report for the Washington District.
I believe so. We can try it.
Chris Doherty with our city's Transportation Division and the Public Works Department will present this item to you this evening.
Chair and other members of the Planning Commission. Again, my name is Chris Doherty. I'm the Transportation Program Specialist with the Public Works Department. The item in front of you this evening is a workshop on the parking component of the transit-oriented development strategy for the Washington District.
Is your mic on?
Mic's on.
Sorry, I'll start that over again.
Thank you, but you're fine.
The item in front of you this evening is a workshop on the parking component of the transit-oriented development strategy for the Washington District. This is one of many components that are moving forward right now for the strategies for the Washington District as part of the HUD Sustainable Communities Development Grant. Several of these have been in front of you already. This is just the parking component where we're looking at projecting future parking demands. To begin on the analysis, we looked at the current parking conditions in the Washington District. Existing on the ground right now, there are 2,940 parking spaces in the Washington District. 1,089 of those are on-street parking, and those are currently serving residential and small commercial uses. We're also utilizing the residential permit parking program in the district to protect the residential uses from the riverfront office uses and from events at Raley Field. Off-street, there are currently 1,851 off-street parking spaces in 2 locations. That would be the Ziggurat Garage and the Raley's headquarters surface lot. We did not include the Cal Stirrs parking garage in that assessment because the way it is constructed, it is not conducive for public use, therefore could not be used by the district as a whole. To project the future parking demands for the district, next slide here. We looked at, we utilized the land use assumptions out of the general plan and did a parcel level analysis on that. And we are projecting approximately 2,200 new residential uses for the district and 280,000 square feet of new office space and 64,000 square feet of new retail space for the Washington District by 2035. And as we project forward and transition to a transit-oriented development environment in the Washington area, to meet those parking needs, we're going to need to be, as I'll outline, we'll have a different vision for how parking looks now versus how it will in 2035. We envision on-street parking in commercial corridors of the district to function as short-term, easily accessible, and higher-cost parking. We'll be using a pricing management structure to ensure availability. Through there, we're talking parking meters and other technology utilized, but still utilizing the residential parking permit program to protect the adjacent residential uses from those commercial corridors and the existing uses that are there today. Off-street parking, we are projecting with the amount of development assumed and envisioned that we would need approximately 2,700 new parking spaces in the Washington District. And while it is assumed that some developments would be able to meet that parking need on site, larger developments would be able to meet that need, it would be a pretty significant deterrent for smaller parcels and would de-incentivize the density that we are looking for in that area and the urbanization that we are envisioning for that area to make smaller parcels meet all of their parking needs on site. In addition to not that building in excess amount of parking in the district being kind of counter to the urbanization envisioned for the Washington area, it would also add about $110 to $150 million burden on development costs of the district. Parking, especially in a denser environment and structured parking, is incredibly expensive. So to meet the needs of this new emerging area with moving forward, it is envisioned that the city will be a very active participant in helping managing both the supply and the demand of parking moving forward. We have identified a series of management strategies. There we go. And kind of categorize them into 3 different types of strategies. The first one here we can look through, it's the efficiency strategies. What these allow you to do is use existing parking or new assets in a more efficient manner so that you're not required to build the level of parking that you might need by requirement. We've broken these down by technique and by the approximation of reduction that you can use in building parking moving forward. Some of these include eliminating a minimum of parking in the area, but having a parking maximum instead. And some of these would be use of an in-lieu fee. So if it is not financially feasible for a development to build parking on site, they can pay for it and go into a larger pool and build structured parking somewhere in the district. The next set of strategies are the financial incentives. This would be the pricing of parking to be a commodity, the unbundling of parking on residential and office uses so that someone would need to make a concerted choice to have parking if they wanted to. If they did not, if they were living a car-free lifestyle, their apartment or their housing unit would not have a unnecessarily paid for a parking spot. And also to work on the trip reduction side of things, the alternative commute incentives, and to, parking is inherently a storage problem. If we reduce those trips into the district in car, we would need to store less of them. And finally, the supportive strategies, which none of these strategies really work without proper parking enforcement. We would need to beef up our parking enforcement as it exists today moving forward, and also still utilizing that residential parking permit program to kind of help shield the existing residential uses and new residential uses for on-street parking if need be. This concludes my presentation. I'm sorry, the PowerPoint. And I'm available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chris. I will start to my right. Commissioner Guerrero, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I do have some questions. Regarding future development and, the need to kind of contain the parking, is there an interest in looking at parking permits for residential areas for streets if there's some limitations with developments that have like on-site parking?
I'm sorry, utilizing on-street permits?
Streets, yes, on-street.
Yes, that would definitely be one component to look at, but on-street parking is a finite resource. If depending on the amount of development, we could use it to some extent, yes.
Maybe provide some sort of limitation for residents to, have one vehicle or something and has, and then or charge or something like that in the future so that, it discourages additional requirements for parking.
Our current zoning requirements do allow on some developments in the urban parking standards up to 20% of their parking needs can be met on street. We could elaborate on that.
And then I think what would have been helpful for me in looking at your parking strategy is I'm thinking of, well, what about everybody else that, needs to get through these streets? What other modes of transportation do they have? Bicycle use, things like that. Because I'm looking at it from one narrow aspect, the parking, but I'm looking at it from also other modes of transportation that folks to encourage them, as we look at this from a holistic perspective. That I think would be helpful for me in reviewing this particular analysis.
Sure, and I agree. They work better as a joint discussion. The cross-section and street and circulation element component of this, I believe, came forward previously a few months ago.
Right, I recall that.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Guerrero. Commissioner Moore?
I think the plan has some great ideas with it. I would love to know, what is your in-lieu parking fee going to be? $40,000 each time they're short of space, at least?
That would be above and beyond what it normally costs to build a space in a structured parking.
You just said it would cost that much.
I'm sorry?
You just said it costs that much to build one.
Sure. Traditionally, an in-lieu fee is, as I think we have proposed in the past, would be somewhere under the amount it would be to physically build the structure, or to build structured parking. Otherwise, they would just be able to build it on site, and that would go into a pool. But to more distinctly answer your question, that fee has not been developed yet, and it really depends a lot on market forces, and we'd need to do a nexus study to develop that fee before we move forward.
So you're thinking you'd charge like 20,000? You'd charge half price? I mean, I know you haven't established a fee, but I mean, I don't understand how you do that. I think you should pay as you go. I mean, you know, otherwise we're gonna get so far behind in parking, we won't be able to take care of the people as it becomes necessary.
Yeah, I think a lot of.
Or we could have the city build the structure and then.
That may very well
You
be.
can tell us that, it's okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is somewhat reminiscent of some of the things we talked about with the Bridge District specific plan going forward, especially, you know, in the early years where a lot of structured parking is really not, you know, not feasible. Part of why we like to, from a city standpoint, have some involvement in the construction of garages is so that we can ensure that they remain accessible to the public and don't become a fully private, you know, operation. So the biggest way we can do that is if we have some financing in there ourselves. So I would expect that an in lieu fee would be something short of, you know, full equivalent cost to the space, because it's all complicated, because you're talking about parking, it's not just making available, it's what the revenues would be from parking in a garage, because the garage wouldn't be free. So it's going to be a fairly complex analysis to arrive at that.
We kind of talked a little bit about this in the past, and, you know, when we were going to build a development and we were going to use part of the parking at the Ziggurat or something. And so, I mean, we've talked about it in the past, it's just I've never figured out how we ever build one of these things.
Well,
Because they're very expensive.
Yeah, well, hopefully our first step would be to get more access into the Ziggurat garage, because that sits about half empty every day.
Right.
And we can't.
And
ever-
is empty almost all night. And that's kind of what we talked about, a mixed-use type use of parking.
So we want to obviously maximize the use of these existing assets, you know, to go, and that's got to be priority number one, is gaining access to at least 600 spaces in there that go empty every day.
I guess my comment comes back to not necessarily the bigger user, but maybe a smaller user that has, and I can't think of, he's going to put a fourplex on a lot, but he only has room for 2 parking spots. So if on top of everything else, you add $80,000 to him as a parking fee, I just don't know how feasible that becomes. So I guess I need to know a little bit more how all that works when we get to that point. But that's fine.
Thank you.
Um,
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. That was very informative and enlightening on parking. With the strategies section of this, I was just kind of curious, and you don't have to answer this tonight, how these individual strategies might play together as far as the benefit goes. Because a lot of these say 10 to 30% reduction in parking. Well, obviously, we can't do all of those in concert with each other and that sort of thing. But I would just, you know, I'd be interested in what other communities that are like the vision we have for the Washington area there, you know, what they've employed, successes and failures. Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Austin?
Thank you again for a great presentation. So from my perspective, one of the reasons that we're doing this parking strategy certainly is because we have some grant funding, but more importantly, we're doing this planning strategy now so that when we, I'm guessing, apply for some state, federal financing, we can show them that we have done the planning for these pieces. It would make sense to me that identifying a parking structure would be a significant portion to that. One of the reasons is I'm not saying that we're going to build this parking structure now, nor do we need to line up financing. But if we submit for a request for financing and saying, listen, we did the planning, we would like $6 million to build, 200 unit parking structure, that's going to be a critical piece, and that goes into what I'm about to say. We've identified, of course, we've been talking streetcar. There's clearly momentum now on the other side of the river to get the streetcar done as well, where we haven't had that luxury before. I think that everyone's very cognizant that the streetcar is a short-distance people mover. For us to pretend like people won't come to West Sacramento from Natomas and Davis, park in West Sacramento, and use a streetcar to go to a Kings game, go have dinner in Midtown, and come back, I think is a huge miss. And so I think we really, really need to consider a significant parking. I think a parking structure is really the only way to do it. Even if we identify potential sites or an approximate size, that doesn't mean that we're married to that. It just means that we're offering alternatives so that when we do apply for financing, if there's an opportunity to get $3 million or $6 million towards a parking structure, that's something that I think we need to really plan. So that's one piece. Another piece that I wanted to address is, again, the development in Luffy. I don't want to disincentivize, we have some really creative development pending in Washington, and I don't want to disincentivize that type of development, whether it's high-density residential or some really excellent kind of retail, restaurant, commercial uses, and I worry that that might do that. I don't think that we at all have any idea of what that in Luffy could look like, but perhaps the solution is that that's a piece that we keep in our parking strategy, but what it might look like is if we build a parking structure, we could, it would be kind of something, if we build this parking structure using alternative funds, the city could probably front the money or, have some sort of match, and that these in lieu fees could pay into that. But I agree, I think that they need to be very modest, and of course, there's going to be need to be a nexus study as we look into what that amount's going to be. So those are my two big components, but hear me loud and clear. I really think we need to include a parking structure in this strategy because I think it'll be an opportunity for us to unlock additional funds, but possibly. The
Parking report analysis, the Wilbur Smith study that was referenced in the report, did identify a location for approximately a 500 space parking structure.
Great.
That was well before the second phase of streetcar was envisioned, and it's my belief its location is not ideal for exactly what you are referring to. It would put it, I don't think I have a laser pointer here, but it would put it adjacent to Capitol Yards on basically the corner of 5th and G. Thank you, David. I think I would like to see either one of the larger developments build a structure on site anyway, and maybe we could then add to it to increase its size and have it open for shared ability, and have that be closer to a streetcar stop to better meet the needs of the district going forward. And to address your concern about the in lieu fee, these are not meant to all be set in stone. They're meant to be more of a cafeteria of options for a developer coming in to see what would meet their needs for their size of development. And it would be the city's envisioned role to really facilitate and help with that process. We want to incentivize as much development and density in this district as possible. And if parking is a hindrance, we can figure out ways to make that not a hindrance.
Commissioner Galvin?
Well, you covered most of it. I did have a comment on the in lieu fee too. It sounds like most of the questions have been asked, but so how would that work? Is the money that goes into an in lieu fee generally designated for specifically something like a parking garage?
It is envisioned that we will set up a parking fund and a parking management fund because in this district will be probably a city-owned garage, if not a city-partnered garage. We'll have parking meters, and we'll have other components that are kind of feeding into this parking management district. And that district might also encompass the Bridge District and the Central District here as well, excuse me. So yes, it would feed into that so that we could find solutions to either it would benefit the district as a whole, or if we could find some way to meet your needs closer to you.
So I do concur with the thought of a parking structure, but I think David hit the nail on the head. We have 600 spaces that aren't being used at all. And why build a parking structure when you have it right there? Is there any, Dave, what's the outlook on that? Is there any way of doing that, or?
Yeah, we've been trying to penetrate that garage, for years. DGS, control, is the tenant over there and largely has rights to the entire garage. And, even though we made some improvements of late, because it's used a lot more for Rayleigh Field parking, than it used to be, we still need to get in there and be able to at least be able to sublease, a couple hundred spaces, and then we could turn around and meter out. So that still remains an objective, and we just have to get to the right people at DGS to be able to allow that.
So I'm sure you're using whatever leverage you have to make
It
that
seem
happen.
they would
That is
want
the heart
that.
of everything right there, so.
There's a lot of money to be made by the private operator. And city, agency put a lot of money into building that garage, in the first place many years ago, so.
Valet parking?
Have we engaged our representatives in?
Oh, yeah, that is an ongoing effort, without a doubt. If we can open that up, that can change a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Gowan. Thank you for the presentation. I only had one question, and I didn't see it in here. But is underground parking just not an option? Is it just really expensive, or how does that? That was just my curious.
It is very expensive.
Okay.
There's nothing in here that would prohibit anyone from going subterranean or partially subterranean, but
Right.
it is very, very expensive.
Okay, that's what I figured. I was just curious. And I'd like to thank Commissioner Austin for her input and those ideas, and something that I didn't think about. Anybody else have any other comments? Okay, great.
Would like to take any public comment on this item, if there is any?
Nope.
Underground parking, your limitation is your water table.
Right. Right.
That's
Okay.
why we can't have a cemetery either.
Is that why?
Yeah, all those blocks just pop out of the ground.
We're like New Orleans, right?
Only Charlie.
We tried to have a cemetery years ago.
Thank you for the clarification. Moving on, item number, where are we at? Item number 5?
Yes. We are recommending this item to be continued. However, given the results of earlier items tonight, at this point, I would actually request you continue this to a date uncertain.
Okay. So do we have to have a motion to do that?
Yes, please.
Okay, could I have a motion to,
Move to continue
To a date uncertain.
to a date uncertain.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
We're unanimous, that's it.
I know. And item number 6, minor map modification to River Glen Estates tentative subdivision map.
Yes, this item was on one of our prior agendas, and we did not act on it that time because our applicant was unable to be here then at the last minute, but she is present here tonight and has stuck it out, so we appreciate that of her. This project was before you earlier this summer, in that this property was unique in that it actually had 2 different tentative maps that had been approved on it over the years. And by virtue of the various state legislation that has been passed, both maps at the time were actually still valid maps. So we brought an item before you back in June that sought the commission's concurrence of which map would be applicable, and that was the larger map, which was the 8-lot map. That is now what the applicant, who is new to the project, was not the subdivider at the time, as goes. So now that is the map that is in effect, and the other map is no longer applicable. Applicant here has requested that the commission waive the undergrounding of overhead utilities requirement, which is principally, in this case, along the project's Marshall Road frontage. She's indicated, as we have seen previously, that this is a very costly item, and although it just does appear to be one of the more straightforward undergrounding opportunities that we may have seen in more recent projects. The commission does have the authority to waive that undergrounding requirement. They opted not to waive that requirement when this project was approved in the past, but staff believes this is on the rural edge of Southport and would not be totally inconsistent with past planning commission decisions regarding undergrounding, although that commission has typically done that on smaller projects, not ones that are the subdivisions of 5 or more parcels. You also, as a memo tonight, you have in front of you from Kathy Allen, we did receive some correspondence from a nearby resident, Mr. Albrecht. In staff's view of his letter, he does appear to oppose the undergrounding. And so staff is here tonight recommending that the commission does consider waiving that requirement. And the applicant is also here tonight and can provide her input on this item. So with that, I will answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, David. Do my commissioners have any questions?
I do have a question.
Okay, Commissioner Guerrero?
So at this point in time, we are requesting it to be completely waived, and in the future, should there be the undergrounding of the utilities along Marshall Road, future developers would be paying for it only?
This project is unique because it has two really distinct boundaries. The west end being Otis Avenue, and then the east end being the drainage canal. So in this manner, it would appear that this undergrounding of this segment would be largely on this property. And so unless all the other properties along Marshall were kind of coming into play at the same time, it might be difficult to fold this into a larger district. And so really what we're talking about is this property essentially itself along Marshall. I think if that.
So what we have here, I'm just trying to get some clarification on the undergrounding of the utilities along Marshall. That will likely happen in the future.
Well, it all depends on how the sites develop. I mean, this is the sort of the rural edge, between the two villages. The project at the far west end of Marshall, Commission did require undergrounding, and that's still pending. And so, but there is a large property in the middle that, has never been proposed for any development. And so unless that happens, because the subdivision is what triggers the undergrounding requirement typically. And so in this area, that's what we have, before you tonight on this particular property. And whether or not we want to continue to maintain that requirement at this time. And this does appear to be one where the poles are there are at the edge of the right-of-way. It's a fairly straight shot. So this undergrounding, could be done, and not, although it still would remain costly because it just is.
Right. So if there were to be future developments, and we would expect that those applicants be required to pay, could we look at the possibility of this applicant also contributing based on, a proportionate share of what they're establishing?
Well, if there was a comprehensive undergrounding program, that would go on some length of Marshall involving multiple properties, then perhaps that, scenario could work. At this point in time, we have no indication that there will be a more comprehensive program to do that along Marshall, so it is sort of on a property-by-property basis.
Okay. I guess maybe I'm wondering if it does happen, and it may happen over a long period of time, and we start waiving the cost of this, that it doesn't happen at all, and, taking a look at some flexibility in the future to require it, a contribution for making sure this is covered. The costs are covered.
The opportunity, if we want this to be undergrounded, this is the opportunity, here. If the commission waives it now, there will not be an opportunity to go back and ask for it to be done later, or ask for any type of contribution toward a larger widening or undergrounding project, at that time. So this is sort of the chance, so to speak, if the desire to have undergrounding of these existing overhead, you would want to leave the condition as is.
Okay.
Is there some mechanism to actually do this whole project at once, the entire length of Marshall, thereby probably reducing the overall cost of the whole thing?
Well,
and then, because the reason I ask is, here's my problem, and this kind of plays into what Martha said. I really think undergrounding is important and needs to happen. But I also think that Ms. Weber's property and her development needs to happen too. And if she's saying it's cost prohibitive for her to do it now, and to, because she's the single project, and you know, it's going to happen again and again and again. You know, I guess my question is, why don't we just do the whole thing at once, and then as developments come along, we assess them for their portion of it?
Well, there's a couple of, you know, ways. I mean, obviously doing this on a more comprehensive basis would be the most preferable and ideal way to do it. You know, unfortunately, we have a few intervening properties, you know, in the way that aren't proposed for any development or don't appear to be poised for that at any time soon. So overall, even under that scenario, someone or something has to front the overall costs and then seek reimbursement over time, you know, which they may or may not get. And, you know, the city isn't in the business of, you know, undergrounding all of these utilities just for doing it. And even if the city were in the matter, we would have to just go on the assumption that someday we get reimbursement, which may be 5 years, 10 years, or it may never happen. So it is typically subdividers that do the undergrounding on these projects. And so this is a fairly standard condition that we put on, you know, virtually all maps, and the commission has waived that on some rural projects over the years. Remember former Commissioner Morosini, this was a big deal for him over the years. But right now, there really is no mechanism for a comprehensive program if you wanted to look at, you know, from, say, this property on Marshall all the way to the West End, you know, for example. There really is no means for that.
But just as a comment, David, when we waived undergrounding, I don't recall us waiving undergrounding for a subdivision. I understand we waived undergrounding for a parcel, and I remember doing that on numerous occasions where there'd be one guy that would build on one lot, and we go, we want to underground, and we go, there's nobody else undergrounding on your whole street. And so we gave it there, but I don't recall us allowing a subdivision not to underground.
Well, you're correct on that, Commissioner Moore. You know, many of these properties, especially some of these small, like 3-lot maps we've done around town, it's impractical because someone would take down one pole and put 2 more up. Right. You know, in this particular project, you know, there is a logical way to go about it to where you would see a net reduction in poles, because you could start it at the pole that's at the east end of the property, and then it would go, and then you would probably just leave up the pole that's at Otis and underground in between.
I would think that myself.
And so, and there, you know, it's right at the edge of the road, it's on the edge of the property. This one here would be one, you know, we're not trying to downplay what the potential cost would be, but, you know, this would be we would think would be a pretty prime opportunity if the commission wanted this to be undergrounded. You know, this is one that could be done more straightforwardly than some of the others we have seen where it would be probably impractical.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to, you know, I don't, you know, I can almost understand the point of the applicant going, why am I the only one on Marshall doing it? But
Well, she wouldn't be, you know. The other projects the commission has approved toward the West End have similar conditions.
Yeah,
They
and all I
just
was
haven't
saying
developed
is,
yet.
my only comment was, this is a subdivision. It is not
Absolutely.
a lot. And that, to me, makes just a little bit of difference, but, okay, thank you.
Can I weigh in as well? One of my concerns is that this is precedent setting, and I think that you hit on it. It's precedent setting for in a couple of ways. From my perspective, again, I have personally never seen a subdivision in an incorporated city approved without undergrounding utilities.
You're just not old enough.
Fair enough, fair enough. But my point is this, I realize that we're framing it as a rural edge, and in reality, it's really nestled between 2 of our most significant neighborhoods, right? You've got Bridgeway Islands and Bridgeway Lakes, and this is what separates the two. In my opinion, it's very straightforward. This type of project, even though it's a small subdivision, should be subject to undergrounding utilities. That's just the only way that I can see it. And if we don't subject this property to this, if and when, and I think that it's going to be sooner rather than later, folks want to develop down the way, that's going to be a problem. Another key thing is that this expense is not being subjected by the city. The city will not get money for undergrounding utilities. The utilities are going to get paid. You know, the work has to get done. And so the city is requiring, in my mind, kind of an aesthetic public works thing, but really it's being paid to the utilities. I would say this, and then it would be a question for when, I guess, when we open up to the public hearing, which we just apparently are just talking. Has there been an effort to work with the local utility on a fee deferral process? Or maybe something that would be, you know, as lots are built out, the city has these conditions of approval that we're discussing, but it's really the utility, the individual, you know, dry utilities that are going to have to be paid. So that's, I just wanted to weigh in that, to, you know, it's not just West Sacramento. I've never seen a subdivision that didn't have underground utilities currently, I mean, in an incorporated city. So, and then to the issue of pulling it down, the existing homes that where I imagine you'd be pulling utilities from, right, to do the underground work, they appear to me to be of a vintage of when this was an unincorporated county area. They don't appear to be, you know, from the 90s and 2000s and onward. And so those, in my mind, were there when it was rural, and in my mind are kind of grandfathered in. I wouldn't expect a current homeowner to underground utilities, and I also don't expect that the city would take on that added cost. So that's just my perspective.
Commissioner Gowan, nothing? This isn't a public hearing, so this is just a.
Okay, yeah.
That's why I didn't open.
We would obviously, recommend you take public comment on this. We have at least one very interested party on this matter.
Would the applicant like to come up and speak?
Good evening. First and foremost, I'd like to apologize for not making it last time. I had the stomach flu, and obviously this is my punishment waiting this long. So I've taken a closer look at the power lines along Marshall many times in the last few months. Looking at the stretch, I honestly see no reason why to put that underground. It's zoned rural estate. Out of the 8 parcels, it's actually only 4 that are on that side, so it's not like all 8. It's zoned rural estate, as is all or most of Marshall Strip. If you look at the Lakes community, they did not put the lines underground there. I don't know how they got away with it. Is it because they put the parks, the water? I'm not sure. And this is residential zoning, and they didn't have to do it, which makes up, by the way, close to a third of Marshall Road. Perhaps, let's see. When looking at the whole of Marshall, it honestly looks, I mean, most of it will stay above ground, probably at least 2/3. You're talking about a third of it is existing homes. They're not going to pay for it. Another part of it is the Lakes community. There are 38 posts running down Marshall. 4 are on this property, by the way. 2 of the posts that are on the property is actually property that's being taken away for public use, if you look back at the map. The only 3 lots that I know that are left are the ones between Otis and the Lake community, which is that farmer who's never going to leave, probably. He got a great offer once and he didn't take it, so I can't imagine that'll happen. The end of Marshall, which actually I saw is recently for sale, which they only have 2 posts, I believe I counted over there. And then the one along Seymour and Marshall as well. All 3 properties that are left that can be developed literally make up less than 1/3 of Marshall. When it comes down to it, if I underground the 4 posts, you're talking about less than like 1/10 of Marshall is being undergrounded. As for PG&E, by the way, I have spoken with them to some extent. Some of their concerns mentioned are the lane of traffic will be closed along Marshall for at least a week, Otis Road completely for the cross line, and the power outages will occur actually on the Bridgeway Island community side for an unknown amount of time. Reason being there's a 120,000 volt switch with a primary riser attached to serve housing development on the other side, which I know nothing about electricity, but that's what I was told.
Sounds impressive.
Yeah, just reading it. I know both the city and I are looking to develop this into a positive thing. This is obviously a factor, whether I can do it or a developer will even buy it to do it. But that's pretty much it. That's, 4 posts of 38. That's really what it comes down to.
Do we have any questions for the applicant? Or comments?
My question, did you talk with the utility, I mean PG&E or otherwise, about a fee waiver or deferral or any sort of forbearance or anything?
No.
That might, I can't guarantee it's PG&E, but it would be something to look into to see if there is something that they could do, considering, for example, if you develop the properties not on that site and, not on the street side or whatever, there may be ways around it.
Yeah.
Something
I
to
mean,
look
those properties also, the homes are actually on the, if you look, the street comes down from Otis, so the homes are away from that street. So that is the rural side of the properties, you would say. It's just basically a bunch of land
Yeah,
behind
but
the homes.
your dilemma is the fact that you're making a subdivision. Once you make a subdivision, that's a requirement. And that's 5 homes, David? Yeah, 5 homes. Once you've done 5 homes, you're a subdivision. And there's no way that I can see that you can waive that without everybody else in the world going, I don't want to do it either. And you didn't let her do it because you created a subdivision. Once you create a subdivision, that's what you have. That's kind of harsh, I guess, but I don't mean to be that. That's just factual. I mean, it'd be great to say we could waive it, but then that'd be like going to Bridgeway Lakes and telling them that they don't have to underground either because you don't.
But they didn't.
They did.
They didn't along Marshall.
I have a question.
There's no homes there either from lakes.
Are there still David, are there still poles on Marshall towards Southport? Toward, the other end where Marshall dead ends and you have the Bridgeway Lakes?
Yeah, I believe most everything is above ground on the south side of Marshall in this area. I haven't been down that
So
little bit.
everything is above ground.
So why weren't they required to go underground if that's?
I don't recall the specifics of how the Bridgeway Lakes and that Bridgeway Lakes North part, came about at the time. And I was just trying to go back and remember through some of the projects along there. There was the project at the west end that got started and stopped, the River Glen Estates. Actually, that one had another name at the end, at River Trails Estates. There's a requirement that's still pending. There's even still requirements still pending on some of the Shea homes from Bridgeway Lakes North. Was supposed to actually have been done a couple of years ago, and we need to bring that back to the commission for some further consideration.
So they haven't been waived, they just haven't done them yet?
Well, and some of those projects, they haven't gotten built, so they, the waiver, much similar to this one, the project was approved, but it, hasn't proceeded to any construction phase yet. So there's still some undergrounding that's still pending out there. And this is one of the sites, but it certainly is not from one end to the other, completely.
Right.
Nothing is underground on Marshall.
Right, no, I understand that, but what I was trying to get a clarification from him was, on the end of Marshall where it dead ends, where the Bridgeway Lakes subdivision is, so those poles are still there, they haven't been undergrounded yet, correct? It's not like we
Yeah,
waived undergrounding.
Those are
They just
still.
haven't been done yet.
Those are still
Who
pending.
would do it at this point?
Those are still pending.
Yeah.
So when that property area that's adjacent to Marshall, when it does get developed, they will have to go underground, correct?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, Shea Homes still has a pending obligation, as well as that sort of 9-lot project that's toward the west end of Marshall.
So it's not like we waived that development. We told them, well, you don't have to do it either. So even though the poles are still existing, they are development, and when they complete the project, they will have to be underground, is that? So,
I don't think that project's been developed down at the end of.
They did grading and then stopped from there.
Right.
Yeah.
So while I
That has to go
understand
underground, too.
the applicant's dilemma in that it's, 4 poles, it's really expensive, like Commissioner Moore said, it still is a subdivision, and I'd hate to, I have an issue with waiving it, and then in the future having other developments say, hey, how come they got waived in? Because none of the other poles of the other areas have been waived. So, I don't know, that's where I'm at.
I mean, it's like the two choices are, it's either, what, 200,000 or zero.
Yeah, well,
Right.
there's,
And I don't think either one of those is fair. I mean, zero means that we have to let everybody else, waive it for everybody else, basically.
Or could the alternative be
And-
that we,
Well, that's what I was
Ask them
saying,
to
if we
pay in
had some
future?
sort of fund, or some mechanism that they could pay into as they're doing it, and then we do the whole project at once, I mean,
yeah, I don't foresee the city getting into the utility undergrounding, business, over here. There
well, they
sort of
wouldn't
is.
have to, it would just be like a fund we set aside, like
Right.
we were talking about with the in lieu parking fund. I mean, it would just be, here, this bucket of money is for this project.
It was called redevelopment. I'm not even kidding. I'm totally
Oh, yeah,
serious.
that bucket,
That's fucking gone. That ship sailed.
Yeah, and those other projects presently aren't conditioned to become into any fund, either. So, the middle option here is that, at least from staff's perspective, I don't know that, development of this property is imminent. And thus, this issue doesn't necessarily have to be completely yes or no, tonight. If we want to look at some of those other projects that are still pending out there for more context, there is the option to potentially revisit this at another time when we're getting closer to actual development of property. If the commission's not ready to just say do it now or let it go forever, because that is the kind of the question.
I'd actually go for that one, Dave.
Yeah, so would I.
That would make more sense for everybody, because that would give her the option to try to see what's out there
I think it would also give us
for everybody.
thinking time to find out something that would be fairer to people in her situation.
There's
Well-
another piece, oh.
I'm sorry, the problem is, Jeremy, and I don't want to belabor this, but if you have a subdivision, you have requirements.
Sure.
Right.
That's the point I'm making here,
But
and I don't
the
think
size of the
we've ever.
subdivision determines those requirements.
Five.
Like, we're not gonna ask for.
Five
Right.
homes determines you have a subdivision.
Right.
5 homes determines you must go underground. That's been our policy, and we've held that policy, as far as I know, for the last 10 years or so. So, I mean, it's not that I wanted underground, I'd prefer it just to stay up, but once you create a subdivision, that's what you create. You create a little monster in and of itself.
So something that I want to weigh in on too is, I totally agree. Let me say, I'm very concerned about setting a bad precedent. But there's more than one way to skin this cat. Like I said, there's talking to the utilities. There's also developing it into larger lots that are more ranchette style and really maintaining that rural feel. I don't know if that's allowable under zoning. I imagine it might be, in which case if you presented, if you're going to develop 2 lots on a portion of your property, that wouldn't be a subdivision. Moreover, I don't know if this is your first time into development, but, this is not the only fee. Fees are going to just come out of the woodwork. I'm like, let me tell you from experience, it'll just keep coming and coming. So if this is already, if it's not this, there will be additional impediments down the road. I would encourage you to consider maybe, again, I do like the idea of maybe something smaller, 2 or 4. We'd have to see about the zoning, but that might be a different approach, is if you brought forward a tentative map with fewer units, it might be a cheaper option, and it
We
might be
dumped the
less
floor.
developed. Oh, okay, so you're getting squirmy?
Yeah,
It was-
I was sort of reading some of the conditions from before too, and actually jogged my memory on something. Part of what the need for undergrounding, could very well be is that we were also looking for the 10-foot wide easement for a trail along the Marshall Road frontage. And so the current poles would likely be in conflict with that trail location. So that was part of the approval from before. And that was, because this is part of that semi-rural kind of area. And I think that goes back to even former Commissioner Morosini and some of his equestrian objectives from that time. And there is a similar requirement on that project down at the west end of the property. So we do have the option, hopefully with Ms. Bangberg would be amenable to that, is that the commission doesn't necessarily, from my standpoint, need to act on this, immediately.
Right.
that's good. I appreciate that, David, thank you.
Potentially.
Just out of curiosity, who pays for the public uses posts that need to go under?
Well, this is it's an easement for public trail. It'll be an easement for public use onto it. The actual
the
description of
2
the
acres
easement
that are
needs to be
taken.
still worked out. As part of the challenge, we're working on a project that was approved way back in 2006. That's still here, and we're still operating on that.
But I think
So
if you
she
would
has
take
to-
a little time to just go back over this whole thing with her, David, and really take a hard look at what we got, and then you want to come back in, then we can come back and talk about it again. But to give staff a time to go back and review what we've done in the past, you get to look at what's on Marshall Road going, how about them? And make sure that we're all on the same page. I think it would make much more sense to spend a few minutes working that way and coming back at a later date when we have all the information that's out there. And then maybe we can do something. But right now, I'd be very reluctant to set a precedent. Would you
Okay.
be okay with an extension for a bit? Are you ready to develop today?
Probably going to put it for sale.
Pardon me?
Probably going to put it for sale to a developer. Is the goal.
I mean, we can vote if you want us to.
Don't know if it's going to make a difference.
I don't think you're going to win, though.
Charlie.
I mean, I hate to
That's foreshadowing, Charlie.
I hate counting down here, but I'm just trying to help you to try to take some extra time. If you even take another month, you might be able to figure something out with David.
But it doesn't hurt to wait a little bit, and I think one of the suggestions that is worth exploring is talking to PG&E. Maybe there's a way to get it done at a reasonable cost, or maybe there's a program, I don't know, but.
Or
can't-
lower
it-
density.
I mean,
it-
their
it-
exact
it
words
can't hurt
was,
to
it's
wait-
ridiculous.
Can't hurt to wait a month and look at it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because that doesn't affect your ability if you decide to sell it.
Right.
You still have this option on the table.
Right, right.
To come back and say, you know what, I found a more reasonable approach.
Okay.
How do
I'd
we
make
work
a
this?
motion to
There you
extend
go.
this item to a date uncertain.
A second.
I'll second, there we go.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion to continue is approved.
Thank you.
Informal discussion, David?
Yeah, briefly, I know it's late. I did want to discuss our upcoming meeting schedule as we get toward the end of the year, briefly. Based on tonight's actions, we will cancel our next meeting on the 20th. And then I would also propose a couple of options for December. Our regularly scheduled meetings, if I'm not mistaken, are like the 4th and the 8th, I believe the 4th and the 18th. Those are regular, Monday, first and third Thursdays in December. The first meeting in December is right after Thanksgiving, so staff reports would be coming to you the week of Thanksgiving. I don't know that you want them at that time. And so we have we have a couple of we do need to have at least one more meeting for the end of the year. We got a couple of projects that we need to bring before you. So we can in December, we can do, I think, one of two things. We can scrap the first meeting that we would normally have and just meet on our second meeting, which is, I believe, is the 18th is the date. Is that right, Katie?
Yeah, the 18th.
Or we can attempt to do a special meeting the prior week around the 11th, and that we would basically just meet once in December. From a staff perspective, we're content to just stay on our regular schedule and meet on the 18th, but if there's desire from the commission to move that up a week to potentially say the 11th, like the council is doing, we could do that.
Does anybody have conflicts for the 18th?
One question too, do we have items for
Yeah,
those
we
dates?
do have a
Okay.
couple items we need, so we do need to have one more meeting in December. So, because right now, the way January looks like, the first meeting would be January 1st, well, we won't have that, the next one would be the 15th, we likely won't have that, so if we don't have a December meeting, then we won't be meeting again until February, and I think that's a little bit too long, so we don't have to decide tonight either, you can look at your calendars. Simplest way is just keep it on the 18th and just meet at our regular time, and that'll be our last meeting for the year. But
Grand idea.
if we just want to put out some options, and again, if we don't have to decide right now, you can let me know offline, but.
Currently, does anybody have an issue with the 18th?
That's the correct date, right, Katie?
Galvin?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
Yes.
That's the correct date.
So I guess for now, we'll assume that
Keep it at
that's
the
when we
18th.
will meet again. So we will not see you before Thanksgiving, so I hope
Oh,
everyone.
so is the 20th canceled?
Yes, we will
Yes.
cancel our
Okay.
next meeting on the 20th.
So the one we continued
forever?
Well, that's why, it will be come back in December with a
Got
couple
it.
other items. So, we will do that. We will not see you before Thanksgiving, so I do hope everyone does have a great Thanksgiving, and we will see you in December.
Thank
And then
you.
I'd like to remind commissioners who need to turn in their applications to do so.
If those are due at the end of this month.
Yeah, so just a friendly reminder.
I like how she asks when it's a 9:30 adjournment. Do you really want to do this?
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Tonight I'll make a motion to adjourn in honor of my new granddaughter, who we got yesterday afternoon.
Excellent.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Congrats on that.
That's right.